Romantic Tales. Chapter 151. This action was completely unexpected to Hellion Vivian, so when that handsome face that was enough to bewitch any girl approached, her heart skipped a beat. However, Hellion Vivian's face didn't show any expression. She didn't even flinch. Her two legs were slightly crossed, and her clear phoenix eyes looked straight into the other's eyes. Her smile didn't diminish in the slightest. On the contrary, the other students who were also eating uniformly looked in their direction with different expressions on their faces. Master. Shadow stood at the side and weakly reminded. He only hoped that His Highness wouldn't flip out on the spot and smash the school cafeteria. However, Beligaju only maintained that posture with a smile that wasn't a smile. He slowly moved closer to Hellion Vivian's ear and said in a low and sexy voice, "If the honored guest is you, I can actually consider selling my body and not my skills." Hellion Vivian's ears heated up. She reached out and pushed him away. Looking at the living evildoer in front of her, her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised. "Stop messing around. If we wait any longer, the sky will be dark. It's not good to make people wait." "There's someone else?" Beligaju also didn't have the mind to let people admire him. He leisurely adjusted his collar and glanced at Hellion Vivian, his long eyebrows wrinkling. Hellion Vivian made a sound and explained the situation to him. "I don't know what stage your martial chi is at, but there's no harm in increasing your own strength. It just so happens that someone suggested that they can help us with tutoring." Beligaju lazily raised the corner of his mouth. On the surface he looked quite interested. However, those familiar with him knew that this was mostly perfunctory. Shadow followed behind the two people, his mouth wide open. "In Dragon War Empire, there shouldn't be anyone who can tutor His Highness." Hellion Vivian also knew that his enthusiasm wasn't high. Her thin lips carried a smile. "The tutor is Huan Ming Xiang." Beligaju's fingers paused. He slowly raised his eyes but didn't say anything. Shadow was completely stunned. "Elder Huan? Then wouldn't His Highness' status be, you know Elder Huan as well?" Hellion Vivian's sharp eyes swept over An Ying's reaction and her phoenix eyes deepened. For a moment, Shadow was unable to react. His fingers stiffened as he tried to think of an excuse. He was afraid that one wrong word would ruin His Highness' plans. However, Beligaju merely glanced at him indifferently, and still spoke with an unhurried tone. "We've met a few times before. Elder Huan is an elder of 3 generations. There's no one in the War Dragon Empire who doesn't know him." "I didn't expect you to have met before." Hellion Vivian smiled. "That's good. Let's give him a surprise." On one hand, Shadow was admiring His Highness' acting skills, but on the other hand he felt a headache coming on. He thought that this definitely wouldn't be a pleasant surprise for Elder Huan. It was more like a scare. "Yes." Beligaju's thin lips slowly curved up as he lowered his arm. "After coming to the White Academy for so long, I haven't met him yet. Indeed, I should give him a surprise." When An Ying saw that smile, his body trembled. His Highness wanted to take revenge on old Huan for slandering him last time. Absolutely. However, Elder Huan doesn't want other people to know that he's in the academy. Hellion Vivian shrugged her shoulders and lightly laughed. "So, you understand?" Beligaju curved his lips. "I understand. As it turned out, his soft spot was here, achoo." In a corner of the trading courtyard, an old man who was sweeping the floor suddenly sneezed. He turned his head to look. Was it going to rain soon? Why did he keep feeling that his back was cold? Huan Ming Xiang rubbed his back and decided to put the matter of sweeping aside for now. He looked in the direction of the setting sun. That girl should be here in a moment. It just so happened that he could take advantage of the little time he had left to think about how to teach people. Sigh, an earth-ranked martial artist. Huan Ming Xiang couldn't help but sigh deeply. Shaking his head, he entered the library pavilion. On the other side, in the superior compound, which was filled with talents, there was a great hall within the compound that received a lot of attention. It was said that the students who could enter this great hall were all 1 in 1,000 geniuses. Here, apart from the people in charge of each compound and the dean, even the teachers didn't have the qualifications to take half a step inside. The entire hall only had a single white stone pillar that reached the sky. The incomparably luxurious night pearls were like specks of starlight adorning the night sky. Floating above the hall were armaments flashing with light. Every time someone stepped in, they would vibrate in resonance. There wasn't a single one that wasn't mysterious, there wasn't a single one that wasn't stunning. Under the dome, there was a lingering fog that didn't disperse all year round. That was a barrier propped up by a superior cultivator. It was invincible, gentle and sacred like a fairyland, making people gasp in admiration. When Murong Chongfeng Helian Jiaoer, 7th Prince as well as Yuan Lingxian entered, they couldn't help but be shocked. Even though they were born in aristocratic families, it was also the first time they saw this kind of scene. It was almost inviolable. Some people said that this was a temple left behind from ancient times. The man who had once conquered the entire divine continent lived here. Later the man was sealed and this place also became a wasteland. In the end, the Dragon War Empire accepted the management, and White Academy was responsible for the reconstruction. Until today this temple had already existed for more than 1,000 years. Its extravagance was something that no other temple could compare to. Even the imperial palace might not be able to reach this level. Today I called you all here to tell you one thing. Tu Sufeng's black hair and white clothes slowly walked over. His voice also carried gentleness. This academy just received a notice that you all have been selected by the battle spirit forces. As he spoke, he slowly swept his gaze over the 4 people in front of him. In the end, his gaze landed on little bald head who was eating a steamed bun. With a bit of pampering helplessness he said, "You all come from aristocratic families. There's no need for this academy to explain. You should all clearly understand what the 3 words battle spirit forces mean. This is the first time in recent years that they've selected new students. You're very lucky to have been selected as soon as you arrived." There wasn't a single person who wouldn't be excited after hearing this kind of news. No matter how arrogant Yuan Lingxian was normally at this moment, his face was also filled with excitement. Helian Jiaoer even more hated that she couldn't publicize this matter to the entire academy. Murong Chongfeng was the calmest of the 3 people, but he also clenched his fists. He'd waited for this moment for too long. It could be said that in order to enter the battle spirit forces he'd put in a lot of effort. However, the battle spirit forces also put forward a request. Tu Sufeng lowered his finger, his eyes carrying a smile. If you want to truly become a member of the battle spirit forces, you must let them see your strength. In this time's competition within the academy, the battle spirit forces requests that you all win all 4 matches. Yuan Lingxian smiled, completely confident. That's simple. Helian Jiaoer also curved her red lips. Her meaning was obvious. Any one of the people from the superior compound could completely defeat the other 3 compounds, not to mention that the 4 of them were people selected by the battle spirit forces. The result was already very clear, they couldn't possibly lose. Although Murong Chongfeng didn't express anything, that arrogant and imposing expression also expressed the same meaning. Only the 7th Prince, little bald head, had a slightly tangled expression. Chapter 152. Tu Sufeng glanced at them, a trace of light flashing through his eyes. His smile was warm and sincere. So to speak, you don't need to adjust your order in the competition? I've seen your name list. It says that if the inferior compound enters the finals, only Yuan Lingxian will compete. The rest will be substitutes. Isn't this method inappropriate? To deal with those people from the inferior compound, I alone am enough. The corners of Yuan Lingxian's mouth carried a smile, but it was hard to conceal his condescending disdain. What's more, whether or not they'll be able to last until the end and face us is another matter altogether. Tu Sufeng lightly smiled and made an oat sound, but didn't continue to ask Yuan Lingxian anything. Instead, he turned his head towards the little baldy and asked, "What about you? What do you think?" The only one who knew of that brat's identity was only this little nephew of his. He really wanted to see his 2 brothers fight. The 7th Prince looked at him with the vigor of a tiger and took a bite of the meat bun. As long as the inferior compound doesn't let me fight, I'm fine with anything else. In any case, he'd already decided that he had to avoid fighting with 3rd brother. Only he didn't expect that these words would have a different meaning in the ears of Yuan Lingxian and the others. Dean, you see, even the 7th Prince knows who's worth fighting with and who's not. The disdain on Yuan Lingxian's mouth became even stronger. Even the Helian Jiaoer on the side laughed. It's still the 7th Prince who's reliable. The little baldy looked at the 2 laughing together, then lowered his head and took another bite of the meat bun. His cheeks bulged and his small eyebrows wrinkled. He didn't know how to tell them that the reason he didn't compete wasn't because it wasn't worth it, but because he didn't dare. Especially after he knew that third brother chose martial chi, he didn't dare even more. He didn't want to offend third brother. When he wasn't obedient as a child, third brother made him stand outside with his little but bear. He knew that he and the fire Qilin loved to eat meat, but he didn't let him eat. He even said that if he was seen naked he wouldn't be able to marry a wife in the future, let alone have meat to eat. The little Baldy still remembered this incident vividly. For the sake of being able to marry a wife and eat meat, he didn't commit any more crimes. He was afraid that his third brother would make him perform the rabbit dance for the palace maids again. He was a grown man now, so he couldn't be so casual. "You'll be loved." Little Bald Head very seriously began to count how many palace maids would blush when they saw him ever since third brother made him do the rabbit dance. Thinking about it carefully, there were too many. His fingers were not enough. Tusufeng was worthy of being the one who had been with the little seventh prince the longest. With one look at the little guy's adorable tiger face, he knew that this disciple of his had started to daydream again. However, do you guys really think that those students from the inferior compound are nothing to worry about? Tusufeng's movements were graceful as he placed both of his hands on the table. His tone carried a deep meaning. Murong Chongfeng, who hadn't spoken the entire time, smiled faintly and opened his mouth. "Dean, are you trying to say that these new students were all chosen by you, so we should be extra careful?" Tusufeng smiled. "It's not because I chose them, but because they are indeed worthy of your attention. We'll take the dean's words to heart." After all, Murong Chongfeng was Murong Prince Manor's heir. His words and actions were much more steady than Yuan Lingxian's. However, the order of the competition was also decided by our superior compound's elders. We're only following orders. Since the elders feel that Lingxian alone is enough to compete, then there shouldn't be any problems. Dean, you're currently the person in charge of the inferior compound. I can understand your feelings, but the matter of the competition should be left to its natural course. We still have to thank you for your guidance. If we really go up against the inferior compound, Lingxian will also be extra careful. Hearing this, the smile on Tusufeng's lips became even wider. Since you all think this way, then this dean won't say anything more. I wish you all the best and strive to win all 4 rounds. Yes. The 3 people smiled at each other, then walked out of the main hall one after the other. As they walked back, Yuan Lingxian's thin lips slightly pursed. I don't know what kind of ability those pieces of trash have, for the dean to think so highly of them. The dean is the person in charge of the inferior compound. It's only natural that he'll lean towards that side. Murong Chongfeng's expression was indifferent as he straightened out his sleeves. However, if we want to guarantee that the 4 rounds are absolutely safe, then we really need to change our order of appearance. However, it's not against the inferior compound, but against the fine compound. When we go up against the fine compound, we must all appear. Yuan Lingxian thought for a moment and felt that this suggestion was very practical. He nodded and turned his head to look at the little Baldy. Seventh Highness, there shouldn't be any problems with the fine compound, right? As long as it doesn't make me fight the inferior compound, it's fine. The little Baldy still said the same old words. This made Yuan Lingxian smile again. Then it's settled. The rest won't change. When we go up against the fine compound, we'll all appear. Good. The Hellion Jiaoer didn't care what the order of appearance was. In her mind, there wasn't a single compound's new student that could compare to their superior compound. Even though Yuan Lingxian and Murong Chongfeng didn't say this, their performance was no different from the Hellion Jiaoer. From their strategic deployment to the order of appearance, there wasn't a single thing that didn't show that only the fine compound's He family's second young master was worthy of them giving him a second glance. The rest of the people were simply no different from bystanders. However, what they didn't know was that some people lost because they underestimated their opponent and were arrogant. Just like this, the news of the battle spirit forces selecting candidates spread throughout the entire academy in less than an hour. Because the battle spirit forces required the selection of candidates to be strictly confidential, no one knew who would be selected. However, they could only think of it by association. Apart from those few geniuses from the superior compound, no one else could guess. As a result, once this news spread, the Hellion Jiaoer and the others once again became the topic of discussion within the academy. The old man sweeping the floor listened to those students discussing one after another. His pair of eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. As before, he calmly held the broom, doing his job. After those students all left, he put away the broom and circled to the rear courtyard, shaking his head. The figure following beside the old man naturally saw through what he was thinking and lightly laughed. Young people can't keep their cool. Thinking back to when I was selected, I also wanted to let everyone know. That girl wouldn't be like this. After the old man finished speaking, he seemed to be angry with himself again. Forget it, forget it. Let this old man think a little, the figure laughed. Elder Juan shouldn't think for too long. What's more, once this time's competition ends, the candidates will be determined. Even if Elder Juan wants to change, you can't. Elder Juan should think carefully about how to instruct that Earth-ranked martial artist that Miss Hellion brought. Chapter 153. Hearing what was said, Huan Mingxiang's back stiffened. He silently extended his hand and took out the Earth-ranked Divine Cultivation book he found before. The more he read, the more he felt that this thing was written a bit nonsensical. However, it was enough as a guide. Huan Mingxiang turned his head and said to the shadow, "It's about time. You go do what you need to do. This old man has to keep his appointment." Yes. The shadow respectfully withdrew. Looking at the old man's departing figure, he couldn't help but secretly sigh. This was the first time he saw Elder Juan put so much effort into someone's matter. It seemed that in Elder Juan's mind he still felt that the eldest Miss Hellion should be chosen. Only, how could an Earth-ranked martial artist deal with the geniuses of the superior compound? The outcome of this competition was predetermined from the beginning. It was very clear that no matter how powerful the eldest Miss Hellion was, she still had no way to reverse the situation. The sun was setting. It was truly the time of encountering the devil. In a corner of the trading courtyard, the radiance slanted down, painting the surroundings into a boundless golden color. The entire earth was enveloped in an extremely enchanting orange radiance. The clear blue sky was as pure as the tranquil sea. Occasionally, a large black bird would let out a loud cry in the sky. The white clouds were like silvery white velvet, covering the azure sky. The radiance projected down from the gaps in the lush tree canopy, forming swaying specks of light around her. The specks of light were once again shattered by the enormous green tree canopy, projecting onto Hellion Vivian's face, making her squint her eyes comfortably. Following that, she stretched her body and said to Beligaju, "Elder Juan should be here soon. You sit here first, I'll go out and take a look." Beligaju held the teacup in his hand, his fingertips lightly turning it. At this moment, that pair of narrow and deep eyes also seemed to be dyed with a thick golden color, giving people a kind of mixed blood charm. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but think of the word evildoer in her mind. As she strolled out, Huan Mingxiang just happened to be walking over with a broom. "Where's that desk mate of yours? Why don't I see him?" Huan Mingxiang's originally hunched back straightened up. Once the disguise was gone, he immediately had the immortal air of an old man. Hellion Vivian was just about to say that he was inside when she saw the man walking towards them. Hellion Vivian turned her head and smiled at Huan Mingxiang. "He's coming. Okay, but this old man has to tell you in advance, no matter how hard you train in Earth rank, you won't be able to enter." Huan Mingxiang hadn't even finished speaking when all of his words were suppressed in his throat following the appearance of that figure. Even his brown eyes widened as the figure approached. It was as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His old face, which had always been calm, was filled with astonishment. The man's chiseled side profile looked as exquisite as an ice sculpture under the bright light, but at the same time, it revealed a sense of indifference. That indifference seemed to be dyed in color in this place, and it was even more vivid. His tall figure stood there, his amber eyes were like the pure and holy light of dusk, suffused with a cold golden light. His black robe fluttered in the wind, gracefully floating in the air like black smoke, wrapping around his slender and powerful body. Just like that inkstone ink, rice paper and lake brush, spread out on a red sandalwood table. Every stroke of the brush, black and white, were distinct, dripping and distinct. It was as if all of the rivers and mountains were nothing more than a snap of his fingers. Huan Mingxiang looked at that unique and unmatched face and was completely bewildered. His entire person seemed to have been struck by lightning, charred on the outside and crispy on the inside. Who could tell him what was going on? How could that icy brat who made people gnash their teeth at the mention of him become become some earth-rank martial artist. Elder Huan, long time no see. The royal family was black-bellied. In order to avoid Hellion Vivian discovering something, when Hellion Vivian mentioned Huan Mingxiang, he said that he had met him once before. If this was the case, it could also explain why the old man was so surprised to see him. Huan Mingxiang heard that extremely polite voice and his scalp went numb. He pulled Hellion Vivian to the side. What's going on? What do you mean what's going on? Hellion Vivian made an oh sound then laughed. I only found out today that you two knew each other before. But don't worry, Elder Huan, my deskmate's mouth is very tight. He won't tell anyone about you in the academy. Huan Mingxiang became anxious. I'm not asking about this, I'm asking if he's really your deskmate? That's right. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows in amusement. Is it so strange for me to have a deskmate? Huan Mingxiang's fingers paused. In other words, he's also in the inferior compound? Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Elder Huan, why are you so strange today? Huan Mingxiang finally realized that something was wrong. Looking at the young girl's smiling eyes, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. You don't know that he, Elder Huan? Huan Mingxiang hadn't finished speaking when he was interrupted by a graceful and bewitching voice. Beligaju looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He leisurely placed the teacup in his hand to the side and leaned his body. I heard Wei Wei say that you want to guide me in martial qi. To be able to receive your guidance, I'm very honored. Huan Mingxiang really couldn't describe the feeling in his heart right now. It was a bit like eating an apple halfway and then eating a worm. He couldn't get up or down and he was in a panic. Who could get rid of this icy brat? Seeing him, he really had a bit of indigestion. There's not much time left, why don't we chat while practicing? Beligaju strolled to Huan Mingxiang's side and smiled evilly. Just in time, I have some matters that I want to discuss with Elder Huan alone. Huan Mingxiang stretched his neck and shouted, this old man has nothing to talk about with you. How did this junior offend Elder Huan? Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and appeared to be very sad. This junior can change. If it really doesn't work out, this junior can also tell grandfather and have grandfather come to this academy to see Elder Huan. Hearing the two words grandfather, Huan Mingxiang's movements suddenly froze. He turned his head and fiercely said to Beligaju, you come with this old man. Yes. Beligaju's special voice always gave people a kind of indifferent feeling when he said it, as if he was being perfunctory. Hellion Vivian watched the two people walk into the courtyard and begin practicing martial qi. Her eyebrows raised and then she smiled. Generally, the more Elder Huan liked someone, the greater his mood would fluctuate. It seemed that this deskmate of hers was very much to Elder Huan's liking. Hellion Vivian relaxed her mood and lazily leaned back. She didn't mind that the teacup in front of her had been used by someone else. After taking a few sips, she took out a few martial components that she always carried with her from her pocket and began to assemble them. She didn't pay much attention to the movements in the courtyard. Chapter 154. Besides using retired emperor to pressure people, what else do you know? Huan Mingxiang assumed a stance while glaring at Beligaju with extreme indignation. Stinking brat. Beligaju's smile faded and he said indifferently, I know many other things. For example, telling everyone your identity. Huan Mingxiang gnashed his teeth. What do you want to do? Beligaju smiled, a trace of wickedness seeping into his bones. What can a gigolo like me do? When the three words gigolo came out, Huan Mingxiang seemed to choke and began to cough heavily. Very good. Beligaju continued to speak, his voice neither cold nor indifferent. It seems that Elder Huan still hasn't forgotten the matter of spreading rumors that I'm a gigolo. Huan Mingxiang looked at the side of his face, completely defeated. I won't unmask you in front of that girl, oi. Wasn't this the reason why this brat had suddenly interrupted him? However, what the hell was he doing? Dressing like this to White Academy and even going to the inferior compound. If those teachers were to find out, wouldn't they go crazy? For Elder Huan to be able to do this, it's naturally not bad, but... Beligaju moved his sleeves, his low voice carrying a sense of danger. In the future, when Elder Huan mentions me, it's best to speak according to the facts. Huan Mingxiang didn't understand and raised his eyebrows. What do you mean by speak according to the facts? He had never lied to anyone. For example, Beligaju paused, his eyes widening. My heart is very soft and very kind, a husband worth entrusting a lifetime to. Huan Mingxiang heard this and the corner of his mouth twitched. His entire person felt a bit unwell. Your heart is very soft and very kind? He really wanted to ask this icy brat when he said these words, did he not feel the least bit ashamed? It was very clear that Beligaju didn't. He calmly withdrew his gaze, his entire body full of self-restraint. And me? Do you believe it yourself? Huan Mingxiang chuckled. Beligaju's gaze swept over Huan Mingxiang's face without the slightest ripple of surprise. Evaluating this sort of thing is originally meant for others to hear, to make others believe. I believe that Elder Huan can do it. Huan Mingxiang. He was forcing him to lie with him. He had already said that this icy brat had a belly full of black water. Whoever provoked him would be reduced to ashes. Well, since we've reached a consensus, let's start with martial qi. Beligaju paused for a moment. What stage of martial artist did she tell you about me? Huan Mingxiang raised his head and gazed at the sky. Earth rank? He swore that this was the most fraudulent earth rank he had ever seen in his life. Earth rank? Beligaju furrowed his beautiful eyebrows and pressed his fingers to his forehead. He seemed to be having a headache at this stage. He lowered his eyes and thought carefully for a moment. Then he moved his fingers and his entire body emitted a faint yellow light. Huan Mingxiang stared blankly for a moment, his eyes surging with stormy waves. He was clearer than anyone about the strength of this brat in front of him. Ever since he became the leader of the battle spirit forces for the first year, he began to earnestly urge this icy brat to join. However, every time he returned without success. As early as 10 years ago, Beligaju had broken through to the 10th level of the gold rank, reaching the peak that everyone envied. However, the heavens were jealous of heroic geniuses. A fire that no one could have predicted pulled this proud son of heaven down from his altar. At that time he thought there should be a chance now. Even if he didn't personally go out to fight, this icy brat's comprehension of martial qi could still become a well-known figure in the battle spirit forces. However, the result was still the same. Not only did he not agree, he even closed the door to everyone. So much so that when Huan Mingxiang thought of him later, he felt a burst of pity. Don't look at how he talked about Beligaju in front of Hellion Vivian. In reality, the disciple he wanted to accept the most in his life was this stinking brat. He originally thought that this person had lost all of his martial qi, but with a wave of his hand he changed the attribute of his martial qi. This could only mean one thing. Right now, on this scoundrel's body, not only did he have the 10th level of the gold rank martial qi, but he also had other attribute martial qi. This was simply 100 years, no. A rare genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. Even if it was him at this stage, at this age, he only grasped 2 types of martial qi and it would only appear in times of crisis. Because martial qi attributes were originally mutually restraining and nurturing, when a martial artist advanced to the next attribute, they wouldn't have the attribute of the previous level. Otherwise, it would be very easy to go berserk and break all of the meridians. Unless it was an innate ability, then one could simultaneously control more than 2 martial qi attributes. Right now, the most shocking thing was that Huan Mingxiang simply didn't know how many types of martial qi Beligaju was using at the same time. Just as he was thinking this, he saw a red light flash in front of him. When he looked at Beligaju again, his entire person seemed to have walked out from the blazing sun. His entire body was domineering and bewitching. Fire. That was the fire element. Huan Mingxiang's fingers loosened, even forgetting to exchange moves. He blankly stood in place, then suddenly laughed out loud. Good, really good. Worthy of being called the #1 young master in the world. This time he had the confidence to make the other leaders of the battle spirit forces all agree with his words. He wanted to change. Immediately change. Hellion Vivian didn't know why Huan Mingxiang looked so excited, but when she saw the red light emitted from Beligaju's body, she also laughed. Not bad, you advanced. He withdrew his hand and the swelling martial qi also followed suit and gradually subsided. When not even the slightest trace of the flame could be seen, Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips and turned to look at Huan Mingxiang. His evilness overflowed. It's all because Elder Huan taught me well. At certain times His Highness was still very modest. Like this we can deal with the next match. Hellion Vivian turned her head and said to Huan Mingxiang, I still have to thank Elder Huan for his guidance. Huan Mingxiang returned to his senses, lightly coughed twice and pretended to stroke his white beard. No need to thank this old man, you just have to perform well. The best would be to win all 4 matches. At that time he would have an even more perfect excuse to change people. Thinking about it carefully, seeing this icy fellow wasn't a bad thing. Hellion Vivian was also happy. Being able to make a huge profit, who wouldn't be happy? Huan Mingxiang once again stroked his beard, his gaze falling on the man's flawless face, his eyes full of deep meaning. Who would have thought that the Grand Third Prince would live in the inferior courtyard? It was this kind of unexpected accident that made this competition, which was originally destined to have a good ending, full of variables. He was really looking forward to tomorrow's arrival more and more. Chapter 155. Early morning the next day, a gentle breeze blew. All the students and teachers were gathered in the center of the academy. They were all dressed in green and white robes, unspeakably grand and beautiful. At this moment at the venue's judges' table, Tu Feng smiled as he looked at those young faces below. When his gentle and elegant eyes fell on Wei Wei and the others, a trace of profound meaning flashed through his eyes that only he himself could understand. The one sitting next to him was none other than White Academy's master Tu Lao, who had always been absent. He smiled as he stroked the white beard on his chin. He chuckled and said, "How nostalgic. When this old man was young, it was during the Academy's examination that I found out that compared to martial qi, I was more suited for martial cultivation. Now looking at them is like looking at myself when I was young. Truly time waits for no man." Yes, this old man still remembers that at that time, you were also at the superior compound and participated in the competition together with Jizun. Yun Xiao and I were miserably oppressed by you too. The superior compound's master Bai shook his head and said, "At that time, you were much more arrogant than you are now. You even said that even if we were old, our disciples still wouldn't be able to win against your disciples. You actually did well accepting Lord Murong as your disciple. Jizun, that cold temperament, chose this and that, yet he chose a low-level martial artist who had never come into contact with martial cultivation. I really don't know what he was thinking." Tu Lao smiled and didn't answer this topic. He only said, "At that time I was young. Looking at these children now, maybe we can meet some good seedlings. Our superior compound has a few." Master Bai faintly smiled. "Their strength is not bad. Tu Lao, you can actually consider them." Tu Lao made an "oh" sound then said, "I actually hope to see the strength of the other compounds. It would be best if an unexpected talent appeared. This way the competition within the academy would be even more interesting." "Other compounds?" Master Bai raised his eyebrows and indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. His face carried a unique arrogance. Apart from that young master from the He family, what other talents could there be? This old man has investigated the new students of the fine and good compound. As for the inferior compound, even if this old man doesn't say it, Tu Lao, you should also know what's going on over there. Wanting a talent to appear is harder than ascending to the heavens." Tu Lao put down the teacup in his hand and smiled. "Principal, hearing Master Bai's words, don't you want to say something for your student?" Tu Feng originally saw those people yawning and felt a little helpless at their indifferent attitude. Now that he heard these two people bring the topic to him, he gently curved his lips. "There's no need to say anything. Let's wait and see the result. It sounds like the dean thinks that those people from your academy are very promising." Master Bai laughed out loud. The ridicule was self-evident. "Dean, this old man knows that you treat all the students equally, and this is the first time you personally lead a student, so I want to make some achievements. However, no matter how much you carve rotten wood, it is not as exquisite as jade." Tu Feng retracted his gaze from Hellion Vivian and the others, and said with a non-committal smile, "That may not be the case. The competition has not started yet and everything is unknown. Perhaps there will be a result that Master Bai would not expect, so we should just watch the competition carefully." After saying this, he turned his head away, not caring about Bai Jingwen's expression. Bai Jingwen heavily snorted coldly. His mouth didn't say anything, but his heart disdainfully thought, what kind of unexpected result could those trash from the inferior compound have? They were only here to make up the number of people. He reckoned that they wouldn't even be able to pass the good compounds test and would be done for. If it was up to him, then the good compound should be abolished. Their White Academy had a long history of several hundred years. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire. Even in the entire Divine Continent, they could still stand a corner. It was because they had the entire Dragon War Empire's top talents here. And those commoners without any aptitude from the inferior compound were simply here to drag down the Academy's grade. Bai Jingguan lowered his head and drank a mouthful of tea. This time, if the inferior compound still couldn't make any achievements, then the clan elders would have an excuse to propose to the emperor to abolish this compound. Thinking like this, he felt very comfortable. His body leaned back and his 2 hands were placed in front of him, as if he was waiting to see how the inferior compound would lose. The students didn't know what the masters were thinking. Every student from each courtyard stood in the same line, listening to the teacher announce the competition rules. The competition was arranged in order from lowest to highest. Today's match was the inferior compound versus the good compound, and the fine compound versus the superior compound. The competition was divided into 2 rounds. Whoever wanted to watch the competition would go to watch the competition according to the order. The contents of each competition were drawn up by the masters in charge. The first 2 matches had the teacher as the referee. When it came to the finals, the masters would personally judge. The most popular was Master Tu Lao. All the students wanted to use this opportunity to speak a few words with Master Tu Lao, and ask for an armament that belonged to them. Unfortunately, Master Tu Lao sat too far away. Apart from those who entered the finals who could see him, the rest of the students could only look at him from afar. Once the competition rules were set, the students quickly moved to the 2 large venues. Compared to the fine compound versus the superior compound, the inferior compound versus the good compound's venue wasn't very lively. However, there were still 20 to 30 people who came to watch the competition. Almost all of them were from the inferior compound. The good compound was very few, because they simply didn't place this competition against the inferior compound in their eyes. If they had the time to watch this competition, they might as well go to the other venue first and see the fine compound's strength. When the time came, they could also provide some useful information for their own competitors. The first match, divination match, will be half an hour long. The teacher's aged and deep voice sounded. As the captain, Hellion Vivian was currently lying on the wooden table to catch up on her afternoon nap. Her long chestnut hair had a strand of restless curly hair sticking up. Within her laziness was a bit of a casual feeling. Nangong Lai's lips curved into an evil smile. His pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes looked towards the young ladies watching the competition. Slightly curved, he occasionally blinked his left eye, causing countless young ladies to blush. Compared to these 2 people, Baligaju really belonged to the normal category. Only, could he not look at the chair as if it wasn't soft, clean, or luxurious enough to deserve a beating? When the teacher saw this, he expressed his anger. He stiffly tightened his grip on the name list in his hand and yelled, "The first match, divination match. Students who haven't yet entered the venue, please enter the venue as soon as possible. Your eyes are really beautiful. Perhaps after I finish the competition, we can go to the commerce compound together for a stroll?" Nangong Lai didn't stop playing with electricity. Perhaps it was because he didn't have the sacred identity of the genius priest that he could be so unbridled. This made the young lady closest to him bashfully lower her eyes. She didn't even dare to raise her eyes. She softly replied, "Okay." Rip. The name list in the teacher's hand completely shattered. Chapter 156. The student participating in the divination. The teacher pointed at Nangong Lai. "That's right, it's you. Do you still want to compete or not? If you don't compete, then we'll treat it as forfeiting the competition." Nangong Lai very innocently looked back. His handsome face carried a placating expression. "Teacher, life is so beautiful, yet you're so irritable. Not good, not good." The teacher was so angry that his liver hurt. He was just about to say disqualify. Nangong Lai strolled over. The expression on his face changed into a murderous aura. "I'm ready. Let's begin." The teacher stared blankly. In the end, he took a deep breath. "The first match between the inferior compound and the good compound begins now." As soon as his voice fell, the good compound's competitor immediately picked up the divination tool in his hand. Nangong Lai was hesitating whether or not to give the other a bit of face. After all, he was a member of a family of priests. It wasn't good for him to bully a new student with his bare hands. The good compound student standing next to him disdainfully glanced at him. "Trash is trash. You take so long to choose a tool. And so, what gentleness. It was all just a passing cloud." In less than a minute, Nangong Lai finished divining the result. Under the incomparably flabbergasted gaze of the inferior compound student, Nangong Lai walked back to his original position with an evil smile. His body leaned back slowly and unrestrainedly. He even conveniently poked Hellion Vivian, who was about to go on stage. The teacher stared blankly for a long while before announcing in disbelief. This match, the inferior compound wins. Pop. The good compound student's divination tool shattered and fell to the ground. He hadn't even started yet. The second match, armament test. The teacher promptly returned to his senses and loudly announced. The teacher, acting as the referee, hadn't even warmed up his seat when he changed to the next one. He originally prepared a pile of explanations, but unexpectedly, not a single word was used. So stifling. So stifling. Hellion Vivian yawned as she went on stage. Out of respect for the competitors, she curved her lips into a smile. She was serious and courteous everywhere. But what made her feel bad was that the other party didn't appreciate her courtesy. He arrogantly snorted and didn't have the slightest intention of talking to her. And then, the other party was thoroughly tortured to the point of tears. Under the scorching sun, this person could only stare blankly at Hellion Vivian's slender and beautiful fingers, dazzling his eyes as he waited for the referee to announce the result of the match. The armament master was also a bit stunned. He looked at the Xian paper spread out on the wooden table with melancholy. He asked himself why in the world he had to prepare so many explanations in the first place. In the world for what? There were indeed not many people who came to watch the competition, but everyone was dumbfounded. Other than disbelief in their eyes, there was only shock left. The students from the inferior compound, who originally didn't have any hope of winning, even asked their good friends sitting next to them, "Pinch my face. What are you doing?" His friend was also in a daze. The student said, "I want to see if it's true or not." That's right, everyone suspected that they were dreaming and shook their heads absent-mindedly. At this time, Hellion Vivian and the other two had already stood up and were ready to take a stand. 2 wins out of 3. In other words, in the competition between the inferior compound and the good compound, the inferior compound won. Baligaju didn't even take the stage. His white robe hung vertically without the slightest bit of dust. His back was still cold and ascetic, as if he didn't eat the food of the common populace. In the competition between the superior compound and the fine compound, the first round of the divination competition was only halfway through. The situation was very intense, and it could be said that they were evenly matched. When the people watching the competition saw Hellion Vivian and the others walking over, they raised their eyes with slight astonishment. Aren't they competing? Why would they appear here? It should be over. They came to watch the competition. It can't be. How long has it been and it's already over? How long does it take to deal with the people from the inferior compound? There's no need to think to know that the good compound won. What you said is right. The surrounding sounds of discussion also attracted the attention of the competition area. Hellion Jiao Air, who was sitting in the candidate's seat, laughed as she turned and glanced at this side. What did she say? These good-for-nothings from the inferior compound wouldn't be able to stir up any waves. They didn't even pass the first round, yet they still wanted to face off against their superior compound. Chapter 157. At this time, the divination competition was finally over. The superior compound won by a narrow margin. Little Seventh Prince's bald head also looked towards Hellion Vivian and the others. Compared to other people's schadenfreude, that little face's expression was a bit hard to describe. He opened his mouth and took a bite of the meat bun. He chewed a bit and seemed to have thought of something. After that, he got up and lifted the wooden chair that was taller than himself. That relaxed appearance was the same as when he lifted the meat bun. There wasn't any difference. His strength was really frightening. The surrounding people who saw this scene forcibly sucked in a breath of air. Especially those students from the fine compound. One after another, they broke out in cold sweat for the third martial chi competitor, the He family's second young master. Wasn't the Seventh Prince a bit too scary? He was only 5 years old. Was it really good to be this domineering? Little Seventh Prince also didn't care about the surrounding gazes. He put the chair next to Hellion Vivian and the others with the vigor of a tiger. After that, he planned to move his short legs and climb up. Nangong Lai raised his good-looking eyebrows and looked at him. He did his utmost to hold back the smile at the corner of his mouth. No matter how impressive this little imp was normally, he couldn't change the fact that his legs were short. However, it was a pity that with this little girl from the Hellion family here, he couldn't hold this little imp in his arms and properly pinch him. Sigh. In order to be able to freely talk about poetry and life philosophy with the young ladies from each family, he still had to endure. After all, once his identity was exposed, it wouldn't be as fun as it was now. Little Bald Head climbed for a long time but still couldn't climb up. That pair of thick little eyebrows tightly knitted together. After that he gave Nangong Lai a warning look. After that his gaze fell on Beligaju again. Third brother's side profile looked especially cold. Why was this? Little Bald Head tilted his head and pondered for a moment. He silently moved the wooden chair back a bit. No matter what, he couldn't provoke him. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the little guy who didn't manage to climb up the wooden chair the first time and decided to roll up his sleeves and climb up the second time. She smiled gently, bent down and reached out, picked him up and placed him firmly on the wooden chair. The little seventh prince was stunned as he felt the soft hair brushing past his cheeks. He subconsciously looked towards Beligaju. Beligaju also glanced at him. His thin lips seemed to move but there was no sound. In addition, his movements were not obvious, so it did not attract anyone's attention. Only the little seventh prince knew what he was talking about. He awkwardly moved his short legs and stiffly said to Hellion Vivian, "Thank you." Hellion Vivian couldn't help but be amazed by his adorable appearance. Such a punk-style child was really rare in ancient times. What was cool and arrogant was that the meat bun never left his hand. Hellion Vivian smiled. She seemed to have thought of something. She took out the beef jerky that she had prepared earlier and handed it to him. The little seventh prince's eyes suddenly lit up. He silently raised his head and after seeing that someone didn't say anything, he quickly took the beef jerky. "Good boy." Hellion Vivian patted his head and had the urge to take him home. "Good boy." Nangong Lai was very skeptical of Hellion Vivian's sense of beauty. This woman had never seen the appearance of the little rascal beating people. Holding a stick and fiercely beating people, that posture was even more arrogant than his older brothers. "Gee, is this a new way to curry favor?" The superior compound spectators laughed out in ridicule. Someone followed up and said, "You guys should just let her interact with the seventh prince. After all, she didn't even win the first match. If she doesn't think of some underhanded ways, how can she survive? She wants to interact, let her interact with other people. Don't pass on the bad luck to our senior brother." Yuan Lingxian, who still hadn't gone on stage, looked over and frowned. He then strolled over. "Seventh Highness, how come you're sitting with these people?" The little bald head raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Where he wanted to sit was it his business. It wasn't that Hellion Vivian didn't hear Yuan Lingxian's disdain for them. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and lazily looked over at him. Yuan Lingxian raised his eyebrows and extended his hand, wanting to pull the seventh prince up. "Seventh Highness, it's your turn to go on stage. Go." "The second match isn't over yet." The little bald head ate the jerky, his voice cold. "Before there's a result, you're not allowed to bother me." Yuan Lingxian's face stiffened. He was the successor of one of the four great clans, yet he was actually being lectured by a little baby. "What?" The little bald head smiled like a tiger, his killing intent quite strong. "You don't like me?" Yuan Lingxian tightly clenched his fists. "How could that be? Seventh Highness is joking. When the imperial family steps down, the first thing he'll do is kill this stinking brat." The little bald head didn't care what Yuan Lingxian was thinking. He continued to eat the jerky and drink tea. He didn't have any other purpose sitting here, he just wanted to prove to his third brother that he was one of their people. "Oh, this jerky is delicious." Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. "This isn't good. Seventh Highness, it's better to go back." Probably because he was a child, he still didn't understand the difference between the courtyards. The people from the superior compound had always looked down on them. Now that the seventh prince was sitting here like this, although he wasn't very close to them, it was very likely that he would be ostracized by the students from the superior compound. Hearing this, the little seventh prince glanced at Hellion Vivian, puffed up his cheeks and refused very coldly. "It's my turn to compete, I'll go back." Hellion Vivian laughed and shook her head, asking Beligaju beside her, "Why does he insist on sitting here? I also want to know." Beligaju slowly smiled. That smile didn't reach his eyes in the least. "After all, we're not very familiar with each other, so I don't understand." However, I guess that he should be in his rebellious phase. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Rebellious at the age of 5? The imperial family's people should be different from other people in this aspect. Beligaju absent-mindedly glanced at the little bald head's direction. His voice sounded very casual. I heard that when the 7th prince is excited, he likes to dance naked. I don't know if it's true. Perhaps if there's a chance we can appreciate it in a moment. The little 7th prince's small hand that was eating the jerky fiercely paused. His face had an expression of choking. Nangong Lai, who knew the cause and effect of everything, almost couldn't hold it in anymore. He could only hold his stomach, his shoulders trembling as he leaned to the side, holding back his laughter with great difficulty. At this time, Beligaju opened his mouth again, this time speaking to the little bald head himself. His voice was charming. I don't know who is more powerful between the 7th prince and the He family's 2nd young master. The little 7th prince's face became cold. 3rd brother was giving him a task. He understood. Me. He answered without the slightest hesitation, his face full of vigor. Beligaju smiled meaningfully. I'm looking forward to the scene of the 7th prince beating the He family's young master to the ground. Chapter 158. I guarantee to complete the mission. Little 7th prince nodded. However, how did that He family's young master provoke 3rd brother? Didn't 3rd brother say before that he was a talent? Now he wants him to go fight him. Strange. Little 7th prince scratched his head, picked up the wooden chair and returned to his original position. That walking posture was very domineering. Hellion Vivian looked back and glanced at the man. You have enmity with He Zhe? How could that be? Beligaju brushed away the dust on his sleeves, indifferent and harmless. I was only encouraging 7th prince, that's all. Children all need encouragement. Bullshit. Nangong Lai narrowed his eyes as he listened. He had personally watched a certain highness bring up the little brat. There was no encouragement in a certain highness way of teaching. Things definitely weren't that simple. Based on his understanding of Aju, the translation of those words just now clearly meant, little 7th prince, go cripple him for me. Nangong Lai stroked his own smooth chin and started to recall whether or not he had just missed something. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as his gaze landed on Wei Wei's body. The corners of his mouth hooked up devilishly. So that's how it was. Aju must have sensed it himself. Things seemed to be getting more and more interesting. But regretfully, the superior compound didn't give little 7th prince the opportunity to go on stage. The second round of armaments was fought by Murong Chongfeng. It could be said to be a complete victory. Everyone looked at the half-burnt sandalwood and couldn't help but sigh. Worthy of being Master Tu Lao's disciple. Lord Murong's armament strength is simply too frightening. How long has it been and he's already defeated his opponent? Worthy of being called a genius among geniuses. Master Bai listened to the discussions below and stroked his white beard. He chuckled and looked at Tu Lao. It's still your disciple who's promising. He's really bringing glory to our superior compound. And, compared to the other people's exclamations, Tu Lao's mood wasn't very high. If the other person wasn't his disciple, he would have already said it. He would have definitely blocked Master Bai's words. After all, this level of speed compared to what he saw in the Phoenix building was simply nothing. But sigh. He had searched almost everywhere, but he still couldn't find that girl. He didn't know where she was now. Tu Lao almost suspected that this girl wasn't someone from the War Dragon Empire. Therefore he had been waiting for the martial chi test to be held in the capital of the Divine Land. At that time, if that girl still did not appear, he would have no choice but to give up. Tu Tian lowered his eyes filled with an unknown regret. Yuan Ming saw this scene from within the mysterious illusion space. He let out an evil laugh. Woman, your speed should be at least 3 times faster than his. Hellion Vivian didn't answer, but the smile on his thin lips explained everything. He has always looked down on you. Because you are a piece of trash, he even kicked you aside. He doesn't care about our relationship at all. As Yuan Ming spoke, his lips curled into an evil smile. I wonder what kind of expression he will have when he sees your martial talent. Hearing what was said, Hellion Vivian set her gaze on Murong Chongfeng. The corners of her mouth curved. She had always been very enthusiastic about slapping that scumbag's face. Nangong Lai glanced at her and said to Beligaju with a smile that wasn't a smile. It seems that our captain still hasn't forgotten the lord that she has pursued for so long. That kind of expression isn't like her usual self. Baligaju didn't move. He didn't even lift his eyelids. Nangong Lai frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Aju simply didn't care who that Miss Hellion had in her eyes? He didn't know that in the instant he was puzzled. Baligaju raised his head and followed Hellion Vivian's gaze. His bottomless eyes overflowed with ice. His lower jaw was a sharp and deadly charming line, arrogant and indifferent. But no one could deny that Murong Chongfeng indeed won beautifully in this match. It could almost be considered a high-level showdown, allowing the superior compound to defeat the fine compound with an absolute advantage. According to the principle of 2 wins out of 3, little 7th Prince didn't need to go on stage. This made him very conflicted. Looking at the figure not far away, then looking at the heavy buckle he took off, he very seriously made a decision. He vigorously walked towards the fine compound side of the arena and stood in front of He Zhe, who was in the middle of comforting his teammate. His voice was steady. Find some time and let's duel. He just won, and now he wants to find someone to duel? Little 7, are you sure you're not provoking him? You're not rubbing salt in his wound. Tusufeng had a headache and used his hand to support his forehead. Just as he was about to laugh, someone over there handed over the results of the inferior compound and good compounds competition, and even leaned over to say something in his ear. This time Tusufeng really did laugh, but there was also something else in his helplessness. On the other side, He Zhe was stunned by 7th Prince's murderous aura. He began to recall where he had offended the little one. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't think of a reason. He could only raise his lower lip. I refuse. Refused? What to do? Could it be that this time he really wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of having to dance around naked? Little 7th Prince expressed that he was very distressed. He didn't even eat the meat bun as he sat in place and began to think of a strategy. In the end, he pattered in front of Baligaju and said with a serious expression, I'll leave young Master He to you. That's right now he was gambling on how much third brother hated that young Master He. If the degree was ordinary, he would always command others to make a move. If the degree was very deep, third brother would probably prefer to do it himself. N. Baligaju raised an eyebrow at him. That N word was very tasteful, and the end of his voice carried a trace of iciness. That's fine too. Then I'll properly entertain young Master He in 7th Prince's place. Nangong Lai. You're the one I wanted to hit from the beginning. Using little 7 as an excuse, can you be any more shameless? Hellion Vivian watched this interaction between the adult and child and felt that it was very interesting. You two shouldn't have known each other before, right? Little 7th Prince's tiger back stiffened and he didn't speak. Baligaju calmly glanced back and used the same excuse as when he met Huan Mingxiang. We've met a few times. I'm actually surprised that 7th Prince actually still remembers this one. Remember N? Little 7th Prince vaguely responded. He used the dried meat to rub his teeth, afraid that his teeth would be crooked if he lied. Hellion Vivian still felt that it was strange and she was just about to ask something. Those people from the fine compound sneered. You can't even beat the people from the good compound, yet you still want to win against our captain. Why don't you take a good look at yourself and see how much weight you have? Chapter 159. Just as he finished speaking, a gust of wind suddenly whirled up in front of him, stuffing his mouth full of dust. Baligaju absent-mindedly walked past him. What's going on? The person from the fine compound roared. Why is it only my side that's windy? Papa. Nangong Lai smiled wickedly and also walked over. The person from the fine compound was angry. What did they mean by this? Ignoring him? Quiet. The headmaster of the academy, who was standing on the testing platform, noticed the commotion and glanced at them with displeasure. The person from the fine compound could only withdraw his fist. He looked at Hellion Vivian and the others, but his gaze was still filled with ruthlessness. This old man will now announce the final results of your 2 matches. The teacher opened the presented paper and lowered his head to recognize the handwriting on it. Superior compound versus fine compound. Superior compound wins. Good compound versus inferior compound. That teacher thought he was seeing things. When he read to this point, a trace of astonishment flashed through his eyes. The Hellion Jiaoer and Yuan Lingxian standing below the platform didn't care at all. Was there still a need to announce? The good compound definitely won. The white-haired teacher took off the reading glasses on his face and wiped them. After putting them back on, he repeated what he just said. Good compound versus inferior compound wins. What? Everyone opened their mouths wide and turned their heads in disbelief. They wondered if there was a problem with the test results. How could those people from the inferior compound win against the good compound? Even if there was one who stood out, it still couldn't be a complete victory. Could it be that something happened to the good compounds people and that's why they lost 2 matches in a row? Murong Changfeng slightly narrowed his eyes and glanced at Hellion Vivian and the others. The Hellion Jiaoer noticed his gaze and gently opened her mouth. Before, I heard third sister say that the inferior compound had a student who applied for divination. His results were pretty good. It's probably because of that person. What can one match represent? Yuan Lingxian's lips curled into a mocking smile. Look at the inferior compound's appearance. It's as if winning against the good compound is equivalent to winning first place. Each and every one of them looks like country bumpkins. There's no need to care about them. Only then did Murong Changfeng retract his cold gaze. He grunted and said, Go rest a bit and prepare for the second match. However, the superior compound's master looked at the handwriting on the fine writing paper and faintly wrinkled his brows. He won in such a short time? However, there wasn't much to be surprised about. After all, the other party was from the good compound, and wasn't much better than the people from the inferior compound. Master Bai leaned back and said to Tusufeng, Dean, you must be happy. I didn't expect these 3 youngsters' luck to be so good. They can be considered as a variable. What? Tusufeng gently smiled and raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything to Master Bai. The longer a person was superior, the more he felt that others couldn't compare to him. However, he forgot that the world was big and there were always geniuses in adversity. Actually, those 3 people really gave him a headache. They had only participated in 1 match and he had already received 3 complaints. The first 2 people he could still understand. What he didn't understand was that icy brat shouldn't have competed yet, so how could there be complaints? Tusufeng's slender fingers rubbed his temples. It seemed that before the second match he needed to have a good talk with those 3 people. Dean, you were looking for us? Hellion Vivian lightly smiled as she pushed open the door to Tusufeng's study. Tusufeng put the fine writing papers on the table. His gentle voice carried a black-bellied low pressure. Sit. Seeing this, Hellion Vivian turned her head and glanced at Nangong Lai. Nangong Lai shrugged his shoulders and looked at Beligaju again. The latter had already sat down in a languid posture. One hand lazily propped up his chin, while the other hand poured himself a cup of tea without the slightest trace of politeness. Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai glanced at each other and also sat separately, preparing to freeload a bit of food and drink from the dean. The corner of Tusufeng's mouth twitched. His face was a bit cold. I received 3 complaints here. That shouldn't have anything to do with us. Nangong Lai smiled very confidently. We haven't been fighting recently, and we haven't jumped over the wall to leave the courtyard. Tusufeng glanced at him and continued. Each one of them is a complaint against you. Nangong Lai stared blankly for a moment, then lowered his head and began to drink tea. The teacher said that when you were competing, you were unorganized, undisciplined, and even looked down on your teachers. Tusufeng put his hands on the wooden table, his eyes faintly. It's just a competition and you've already violated 3 rules. How did you do it? Hellion Vivian expressed her innocence. I just took a nap before going on stage. Tusufeng. You really don't have any sense of organization. What about you? Tusufeng decided to simply ask them one by one. Me? I didn't do anything. Nangong Lai's finger pointed at the tip of his pen and smiled wickedly. I was always talking and laughing with the noble young ladies watching the competition. I simply didn't have the opportunity to do anything bad. Tusufeng wanted to rub his forehead again. Competitors can't talk to spectators. Don't tell me you don't know that? Was discipline eaten by dogs? Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai started to look at each other at the same time. Their eyes fell on Beligaju. Both of them wanted to know why he was being complained about. Say it, what did you do that made the teachers unable to tolerate it? When Tusufeng looked at Beligaju, he was already helpless. Beligaju twisted his thick eyebrows. The chair we were sitting on was too dirty. So, Beligaju's tone was indifferent. He had no intention of admitting guilt, so I switched chairs with the teacher closest to me. Tusufeng. Even they didn't know this. Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai silently drank tea. No wonder they received 3 complaints. The main culprit was finally found. Simply shameless. You didn't even tell us when you switched chairs. Was this the main point? Tu Sufeng's always gentle and elegant handsome face cracked. He took a deep breath and his voice returned to its previous gentleness. His eyes were bright. 1 complaint deducted 10,000 taels of silver. Hellion Vivian's heartless smile froze. The total is only 100,000 taels. Now it's 70,000 taels. Tu Sufeng drank a mouthful of tea, his voice slow. I believe that in the next 2 rounds, you should have learned how to respect your opponent and your teacher. Thus, in the second round of the competition, when the inferior compound faced the fine compound, Hellion Vivian and Nangong Lai didn't dare to sleep anymore. Nir also didn't dare to hook up with them. They completely changed their arrogant and unruly appearance from before. They understood very well how to respect their teachers and even their movements slowed down. The teachers were very satisfied with this situation. The explanations they wrote were finally put to use. Not bad, not bad. It seemed that the fine compound's strength was still stronger. These 3 people from the inferior compound were clearly suppressed to death by the opponent. Chapter 160. On this side, Nangong Lai was seriously going easy on the water. He obviously already knew the answer but he didn't move his brush. On the other side, the student from the fine compound was immensely pleased with himself, as if he was saying that this kind of level simply wasn't worthy of him competing. And the superior compound's new students, who had already won against the inferior compound, looked at this scene with ridicule. What did I say? They were only able to win by luck. Yuan Lingxian lazily yawned. There's absolutely no need to continue watching. I'm going to catch up on some sleep. Call me when it's over. The Hellion Jiaoer also curled the corners of her mouth, allowing the servant girl to support her to the pavilion under the shade of the tree. She coldly humphed in disdain in her heart. The dean still shamelessly boasted and even wanted them to change the order of the competition. According to the current situation, they simply didn't need to compete in the 3rd round to win the championship, because the inferior compound would definitely lose to the fine compound. This was simply unthinkable. No need to watch, we're also going to rest. The Hellion Jiaoer instructed the servant girl at her side. The servant girl quickly helped her open the oil paper fan, following behind the Hellion Jiaoer step by step, for fear that her family's miss would be exposed to the sun. After all, today's sun really was very big, and the respected royal family had indeed never been active under such a big sun before. His fingers, white as ivory, felt very dissatisfied with this uncomfortable temperature. His eyebrows jumped and his tone was neither cold nor hot. How long are you going to waste time for? Hearing this, Nangong Lai smiled as if some crazy switch had been turned on. He directly waved his brush and wrote the answer. His speed was so fast that the fine compound student across from him was completely dumbfounded. What kind of situation was this? Was he on steroids? Okay, we won. Nangong Lai confidently flung his long hair, walked towards the seating area, and switched Hellion Vivian to the arena. Beligaju looked at him with heavy eyes. You won. Nangong Lai was very afraid of the heat. He lazily sat back and shook the front of his robe. Wasn't my posture just now very cool? Beligaju glanced at him and said in a voice as cold as ice, because of your victory, this lord missed the opportunity to fight He Zhe. Good, very good. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb. Wait, Aju, listen to me. You can use other methods to deal with that black guy. Really, I can provide you with any secret about him. Oh? Beligaju raised his eyebrows calmly. For example? Nangong Lai said with a serious face, I have a record of all the places he went to. Beligaju smiled, extended his leg and coldly kicked him to the side. He shouldn't have trusted a lunatic. He won. The people from the inferior compound won again? The students sitting in the fine compound's viewing area murmured blankly, as if they were dreaming. How is this possible? This is impossible. The contestant in the armament competition simply couldn't believe that he actually lost to a good-for-nothing who didn't even have a bit of chi. Holding the incomplete armament in his hand, he stared blankly at the opponent. Suddenly he bellowed, cheating. You're definitely cheating. Cheating? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and didn't look at that student. Instead she looked towards He Zhe. Her meaning was very clear. This is your team member? Can't even afford to lose? Nangong Lai fully displayed his gossipy nature and said with interest, Aju, look, our captain and the He family's young master are going up against each other. Baligaju's hand holding the teacup slightly paused, and the tea in the cup rippled layer after layer. This is the rhythm of a fight. Nangong Lai very happily extended his long legs. Let's go, I'll take the lead. The He family's young master, who'd always been known for being overbearing and unyielding, also strolled over. Only he didn't respond to Nangong Lai's words. Instead he pressed down on that fellow student's neck and pressed up. His magnetic voice carried a deep and low tone. A loss is a loss. But the contestant really didn't dare to believe that they were on par with the superior compound. Losing to the superior compound was excusable, but losing to the inferior compound, Heize didn't care whether that person was willing or not. Holding the back of his collar, he faced Hellion Vivian and said, We lost, but... He paused and smiled evilly. Are you sure you can win against those people from the superior compound? If you go up against the superior compound again, it won't be in this order. The first match will be martial chi. As far as I know, your team member competing in martial chi has never appeared before, right? Can you really do it? Hellion Vivian frowned. Was he doubting their team's ability? She curved her thin lips and was just about to open her mouth. Just as she was about to open her mouth, she heard a graceful and bewitching voice ring out from beside her ear. The tone was extremely cold, like the gloomy sound of ice melting in black tea. Under such a scorching sun, it was hard for people not to notice. Do you want to fight? Heize turned his head to look, only to see a person slowly stand up from the wooden chair. His legs were slender and straight, his waist was lean and his chest was wide, presenting a perfect inverted triangle shape. He reached out and brushed away the non-existent dust on his clothes, then strolled over to him. His robe fluttered in the wind and the sunlight began to bloom. Under the radiance he became more and more beautiful and at the same time more and more evil, just like the red spider lilies that bloomed all over the demon world. From head to toe he emitted an indescribable coldness and cruelty. Handsome to the point of being indescribable. He turned his face to the side. The lines of his face were like a quiet and secluded bay, so cold and noble that it made people unable to shift their gaze. There was a grace that differed from the lower demons, a charm that differed from the divine gods. Both good and evil, extraordinarily handsome. Heize frowned, intuitively feeling that the other party wasn't easy to deal with. No wonder those people from the superior compound all found him unpleasing to the eye. Just based on this face alone, he reckoned that he could attract a lot of jealousy. That was the type that the woman who grew up with him liked. Thinking to this point, Heize's eyes also carried provocation. He raised his eyebrows and looked straight at the man in front of him, completely unyielding. Even though they hadn't started fighting yet, the sparks that crackled between the two of them made Hellion Wei feel a headache. She pressed her own temples. She finally understood how the dean felt. This scene really made one feel very helpless. Hellion Vivian also didn't say anything and directly pulled Heize's hand over. Her first reaction was to first take away this most impulsive, tyrannical young master. Baligaju's fingers paused and his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian's body. Following that, his bottomless black eyes deepened. The surrounding leaves were swept up by the wind and dark blue flower petals soared up, then fell down. Everything seemed to be in slow motion by magic. In that split second, the chill emitted from his body made even Nangong Lai, who was standing at the side watching the fight, tremble along with it. Aju, is he angry? Chapter 161. Just because even Hellion Vivian dragged the He family's young master away, so that he couldn't fight? Nangong Lai rubbed his chin and guessed that it wasn't just that. Aju, he hadn't finished speaking when Bailey Jiaju's voice interrupted him. The smile on the side of his face was like a killing order from the devil, incomparably enchanting and gorgeous. It seems that it's time for the prey to properly recognize who she belongs to. As he spoke, he turned around. His long curly hair, as black as the night, added a bit of enchanting charm to his beauty. Even the few strands of bangs that casually fell from his forehead and stuck to his fair forehead made people feel that he was unbelievably handsome. Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva and looked at that handsome face that was different from the usual ice cold as frost. He swallowed back the words he wanted to say just now. He was really angry. Creak. The deep blue petals stepped on, making a loud noise. But Baligaju seemed to like the sound of this kind of beautiful thing being destroyed. His handsome face, as if carved by a knife, carried a smile that made people shudder. Shadow followed behind him. His Highness. Baligaju didn't speak, as if he was a bit absent-minded. Shadow didn't know why his master suddenly stopped. He could only stand at the side, trembling. He also didn't dare to remind him that there was still the next competition. Baligaju seemed to have stood for a long time. So long that when he finally knew that the woman wouldn't catch up, he slowly moved his long legs. His robe was rolled up, the silver earring on his left ear emitted a dazzling light, and his long eyelashes cast a faint shadow. His quiet, handsome face looked so harmless, like an angel that had fallen to earth, extraordinarily handsome, unfathomable. Aju. Nangong Lai, who sensed something strange, raised his eyes slightly worriedly. There were still people in the fine compound's spectator seats who weren't convinced. They walked over, wanting to reason with Baligaju. But before he could say anything, he was frightened by the look in Bailey Jiaju's eyes. Bailey Jiaju used that pair of blood-red eyes to coldly stare at him. Step by step he walked closer. That appearance was like a poisonous snake, not allowing people to say another word. The man couldn't help but take a step back. He felt as if his face had been cut by some unknown gas, giving off a slight stinging pain. Stupid thing. Baligaju laughed coldly, but no one knew who he was talking about. Along with the crack of the ring on his pinky, a series of gotcha sounds were heard. All the teacups placed on the wooden table shattered. The young and strong figure was slowly swallowed up by the setting sun and completely turned into a creature under the dusky light. In the boundless red light, only that green robe could be seen fluttering in the wind, and his demonic appearance was unpredictable. At the moment of encountering the devil, it was as if an invisible hand had quietly swallowed everything. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and frowned. He didn't know if the next match would be able to continue. It was obvious that Aju did not intend to continue. What was it that made him lose interest? Nangong Lai wrinkled his thick eyebrows and let out a long sigh. He put his hands behind his head and his gaze fell on Hellion Vivian. Although Hellion Vivian was using force to suppress Heizei, she didn't forget to pay attention to her teammates' movements. Seeing Baligaju leave, she originally wanted to leave as well. But she was pulled back by Heizei. She didn't know who he was deliberately doing this for, but he pulled her whole body into his embrace. Don't move. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and sneered. You better give me a reasonable explanation. Heizei pressed down on her head, but his eyes weren't looking at her. After Hellion Vivian lowered her head to stop Baligaju's bleeding, her first reaction was to bring her team members to the next venue. After all, the martial chi test was arranged as the first round. If he wasn't there, they wouldn't be able to start the competition. Okay. Baligaju stood there with his eyes lowered. His tall figure was tall and his entire face was covered by a cloak. No one could see his expression clearly. Hellion Vivian also didn't notice the dangerous look in his eyes. Because there wasn't enough time. According to the Academy's rules, all the contestants had to be on stage within a certain time limit. Otherwise, it would be considered as a complete forfeit. Chapter 162. Under the bright light of heaven and earth on the competition field, Yuan Zaixian, wearing a Chinese brocade robe, stood with a cold expression. When he had just received the little servant, he immediately sat up from the wooden couch, his eyes filled with astonishment. Those 3 wastes from the inferior compound actually won. What the hell is the fine compound doing? Are they deliberately throwing the game? Yuan Zaixian impatiently wrinkled his brows, then sneered. How could he forget? The order of appearance can sometimes affect a team's morale. In the first 2 matches, the martial chi competition was placed at the end. In other words, Heizei didn't even appear. If he appeared, it definitely wouldn't be this kind of result. Thinking like this, Yuan Lingxian once again mockingly curved his thin lips. Those wastes from the inferior compound actually had quite good luck. Twice in a row, they were able to bask in the glory of the competition system. However, this time they shouldn't even think about taking advantage of the situation anymore. Presumably, they themselves also knew, so they didn't even dare to come. Yuan Lingxian disdainfully looked at the inferior compound's empty competition area. His voice lazily dragged out as he spoke to the nearby Tusufeng. Principal, there's still half an incense's time left. The incense will run out. If they still haven't appeared, then we can only abandon the competition. At that time you can't cover up for the students on your side. Otherwise we'll be bitterly disappointed. Tusufeng elegantly sat in the inferior compound's manager's seat. After hearing Yuan Lingxian's words, he sipped a mouthful of tea, his tone indifferent. I'm sitting here right now. I don't have any right to judge, so what's there to talk about covering up? What the principal said is correct. Lingxian, you're thinking too much. Stand properly for a while. Sitting to the side, Master Bai stroked his beard, his face filled with indescribable pride. In a moment you can come down. We're the school's perennial winners. What's wrong with waiting for them for half an incense's time? Don't be impatient. Yuan Lingxian smiled. Teacher, this student isn't impatient. I'm just afraid that the opponents will be scared and won't even dare to come. That would certainly hurt the principal. That's true. Master Bai pretended to be indifferent as he glanced at Tusufeng's direction. Dean, do those students of yours have a plan or not? If they want to forfeit the competition, they can directly bring it up. After all, they are usually too arrogant and are worried that they will lose face in front of so many people. It's not good for them to continue staying in the academy. We can completely understand. Let Lingxian and the others go easy on them during the competition. Why not even show up? Tusufeng turned the teacup in his hand, his gentle voice lower than usual. Who told Master Bai that they wanted to forfeit? It's just a delay midway. It's not time yet, so why is Master Bai in such a hurry? You're right. Why should this old man be anxious? The one who should be anxious is indeed not this old man. Master Bai said in a strange tone as he retracted his gaze from Tusufeng. Tusufeng sat quietly. His gaze fell on the incense stick that was about to burn out. The errand boy stood beside him, slightly bending forward as if he was reporting something. Tusufeng suddenly frowned. At this time it was unknown who shouted, "The incense stick is about to go out." Tusufeng's hand that was holding the teacup tightened, and his deep black eyes also sank. The three referees glanced at each other and then began to pick up the brush. They dipped it in ink, intending to write the two words forfeit in front of the inferior compound. Only a bang sound was heard. A hole was kicked in the wall of the field. White dust rose and three silhouettes were faintly discernible. Their auras were different, but each one had an extraordinary bearing. Nangong Lai's eyebrows were half raised. He was dressed in a wanton and unruly manner. He raised his hand to press his hair, and his spotlessly white wrist was tied with prayer beads. He had long and narrow eyes and a bad smile. He didn't have enough time to restrain his body's evil aura. Even his eyebrows carried a bewitching charm that made young girls blush. Hellion Vivian stood beside him with a deep and shallow smile that wasn't a smile. Her indolence carried a trace of roguishness. Her left hand leisurely rolled up the sleeve of her right hand, and the corner of her mouth slightly raised. Compared to the other girls, she had a touch of handsomeness. The silver-clothed, black-haired Beligaju stood behind them and seemed to be slowly walking over. His black hair fluttered in the wind, and his long robe fell into the dense fog of cold air. Yet it didn't seem to be contaminated in the slightest. Instead it leaked out an aura that belonged to nobility. It was like a phantom in a withered castle, graceful and calm. Let's go. Hellion Vivian curved her lips, raised her eyes and paused between each word. Let's let them experience how arrogant our inferior compound is. It was a simple sentence. Three different temperaments, but extraordinary silhouettes, pulled open a straight line, and stepped into the boiling cauldron of voices in the field. That kind of indolent attitude, as if there was no one else present, seemed to be responding to Master Bai's words. That's right. They were just this arrogant. Master Bai looked at those people and his white eyebrows gradually knitted together. He coldly snorted in displeasure. This old man has never seen someone enter the field like this. Hellion Vivian and the others didn't care what he said, and directly stood in front of Tusufeng. Their voices were clear and every word was clear. Inferior compound representatives reporting for the competition. The distant referees also couldn't see their faces clearly, but after seeing them hear Hellion Vivian's voice, they stood up and put away their ink brushes. Tusufeng raised his head and looked at the three students who gave him the most headaches. His tone was gentle. Deduct 10,000 taels, you still have 60,000 taels. Why? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Principal, we shouldn't be late, right? Looking at Master Bai's face that looked like he'd swallowed a fly, she knew that they'd caught up. After the competition there was a serious conflict with the other side, causing a very bad influence. 5,000 taels. After that, Tu Su Feng unhurriedly turned his head and glanced at the broken wall. Destroying the facilities of the courtyard, 5,000 taels. Nan Gonglai refused to accept. We were taking a shortcut. If they hadn't kicked the wall they wouldn't have made it in time. Moreover, the most important thing was that kicking the wall out was more eye-catching, wasn't it? Tu Su Feng glanced at Nan Gonglai, looking like he was considering whether or not to deduct the remaining 5,000 taels. Hellion Vivian gave Nan Gonglai a thumbs up. Nan Gonglai's lips curved into a smile, more brilliant than at any other time. Tu Su Feng put down the teacup in his hand, his tone unhurried. Refuting the teacher, add 5,000 taels. Nan Gonglai. Hellion Vivian. Fuck, what happened to not punishing them? Okay, it's your turn. Go on stage. Tu Su Feng paused, then said again. If you win beautifully, the Academy can consider cancelling all of the previous punishments. Sir Principal, your method of hitting with a stick and then giving a box of dates is too good. At least two of the three immediately ignited an unusual little universe, their eyes shining as they looked towards Yuan Lingxian on the stage. The corners of Yuan Lingxian's mouth hooked up as if he didn't put them in his eyes at all. His attitude was perfunctory. Since you've come, then hurry up and fight. After you're done I can still go back and take a nap. Chapter 163. The teacher looked at the referees at his side and nodded. He stood up and heavily coughed twice. Following the sound of those two dry coughs, the entire venue regained its tranquility. The teacher's severe gaze looked all around. After seeing that everyone was absolutely silent, he laughed. The finals of the Academy, the superior compound versus the inferior compound. The first round, the martial chi test, now begins. After saying this, the teacher returned to his original position. Master Bai felt that he didn't even need to watch the first round. That was the Yuan family's most outstanding genius. His martial chi attainment was only below Murong Chongfeng's. In the entire academy, it was hard to find someone stronger than him, let alone a waste from the inferior compound. What he was concerned about was the second round of the armament competition. It wasn't because of anything else. It was just that the armament competition was different from the other two rounds. A written exam was added in the finals. He was afraid that when the time came, it would take too long and the students on their side would become impatient. Thinking about it, the result was already predestined. If he still had to take time out to compete with this group of people who didn't even understand what armament competition was, it was simply a waste of time. He might as well sleep a bit more. Master Bai shook his head. He simply held the purple clay teapot in his hand and began to close his eyes to rest. The spectators watched and let out a long sigh. Look at how relaxed Master Bai is. He doesn't even need to instruct and let young Master Yuan directly go on stage. I reckon that the champion this time will definitely be the superior compound. That's for sure. The first two rounds were all divination rounds first. The martial chi test was left to the end. The inferior compound could still deal with it, but the finals are different. The first round is martial chi. Losing the first round is equivalent to losing half of the competition. That's right. That person from the inferior compound, do you know his background? What level of martial artist is he? He's so bold, going up against young Master Yuan as soon as he comes up. I don't know his background, but last time I looked at the Academy's information. It seems he's Earth rank. Haha, Earth rank? Then he's in trouble. Young Master Yuan won't be lenient. Speaking of which, the inferior compound also won the first two rounds. This person doesn't seem to have participated in the competition. No matter whether he participated or not, he's dead. Don't forget that's young Master Yuan. Everyone discussed spiritedly. All of them rejoiced in the misfortune of others. However, when he saw the figure behind him, he couldn't help but gulp. Bailey Jiaju slowly walked up to the competition stage. His long robe outlined the contours of his shoulders, his tall and straight back as he stood under the golden dusk, so beautiful that even the heavens and the earth seemed to have lost its place. The people around him automatically made way for him. In his eyes, there didn't seem to be so many people and Yuan Lingxian didn't exist. His gaze was as usual sharp, cold, noble and even some unfathomable emotions. Because of this, it made Yuan Lingxian gnash his teeth in anger. He was born a proud son of heaven. Which one of the officials, big or small, didn't have to look at his face in order to pass their days? Even in the White Academy, the students of these 4 courtyards had to listen to his commands. This poor and pedantic brat actually dared to embarrass him. Yuan Lingxian didn't believe that an Earth stage martial artist was worthy of his attention. If it wasn't for this brat being too arrogant, he wouldn't even have thought of stepping onto the stage. But no. He really wanted to beat him into a meat patty. Especially with that arrogant face of his, he'd definitely properly greet him. Yuan Lingxian took a step forward, lifting his eyelids to look at Beligaju. You should now know the difference between you and this young master. Daring to provoke this young master on the first day, I have to say that you really don't fear death. If I were you, I'd forfeit right now. At the very least, you'd be able to preserve your life. Of course, if you kneel and beg this young master in a moment, this young master can actually leave you half a life. Hearing these words, the first to react wasn't Beligaju, but rather the 7th prince sitting in the superior compound's reserve team. The little one stood up all of a sudden, with an expression like the end of the world had arrived. He actually dared to make 3rd brother kneel to him. This child of the Yuan family had gone crazy. This won't do. After the competition, he definitely had to cut off all relations with the superior compound, so as to avoid 3rd brother's collective retaliation. 3rd brother had never been the kind of person to just beat someone up and leave it at that. What followed after the fight was the most torturous. For example, making him strip naked and do the little frog dance. Oh heavens! He simply didn't want to remember anymore. The little 7th prince hugged his own bald head and swayed back and forth. His small body was somewhat unable to stand, but his 2 cheeks were puffed up in an adorable manner. It had to be said that this Yuan Lingxian was too stupid. Really especially stupid. Nangonglai also thought so. He slowly pulled out a smile, carrying a playful and icy coldness. Putting aside the fire qilin, just that man's unfathomable martial qi alone, even 10 Yuan Lingxians wouldn't be enough for him to beat him up. What kind of reaction would the royal family have? Nangonglai turned his head and looked at Beligaju's side profile that had turned cold. Yuan Lingxian still wasn't afraid of death, chirping noisily there. After waiting for him to show off enough, Beligaju finally slowly opened his mouth, only saying 3 words. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? Yuan Lingxian's expression began to crack. Hellion Vivian, who'd heard everything from beginning to end, couldn't hold back. She clutched her stomach and laughed. Instant kill, absolute instant kill. When you hate someone to death, the other party actually asks you who you are. That kind of feeling couldn't be described with words. Yuan Lingxian's face changed from red to white, then from white to black, changing back and forth. It wasn't brilliant at all. Beligaju still had an appearance that didn't concern him. His handsome side profile was so clean that one could practically see the fine hairs on his face. Yuan Lingxian was thoroughly enraged. His left hand tightly clenched, then he flipped it up. A crisp swish sounded. The long whip in his hand revealed its shape with a swish. The body of the whip carried sharp thorns, emitting a golden light. Chapter 164. The long snake entered the sky, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a huge python, its bloody maw covering down from above. That kind of attack speed was fast, and its imposing manner was great. It simply wanted to kill the opponent. Don't mention an Earth stage martial artist, even if they were similarly at the gold stage facing such a huge python, they wouldn't be able to escape. Beligaju's entire head entered the huge python's mouth, and the huge python's fangs were about to tear his head apart. Just as everyone was at a loss of what to do, Beligaju slowly opened his eyelids. His originally black pupils seemed to be covered with a layer of pure golden light as he aimed at the huge python's pupils. Because the marble under his feet couldn't resist this strong force, it already cracked open with golden lines. The huge python's fangs finally completely covered down, completely swallowing Beligaju into its belly. Yuan Lingxian proudly hooked his lips, however. In the next second, his pair of pupils that had always looked down on others couldn't help but violently sway. Because in the midst of the smoke rising from the ruins, the one shrinking back wasn't Beligaju, but the martial cultivator he was so proud of? How was this possible? What did that man do in the end? Silence, a deathly silence. The spectators were all stupefied, their mouths opened wider than an egg, and the expressions on their faces were extremely marvelous. After a moment, rapid breathing sounded like a windmill. Looking at the scene in front of them in shock, unprecedented astonishment flashed through their eyes. The huge python that was originally crazily eating people actually lost its previous vicious aura, curling up into a small black snake as if it had been subdued. It continuously retreated backwards and even had a hint of begging for mercy. However, the man turned a blind eye to all of this, only slowly walking forward. His blue clothes wrapped around his slender figure, and his pure white fur cloak fluttered in the wind, revealing an ice-cold murderous aura. His expression was as indifferent as before, and the curve at the corner of his mouth mixed with a kind of calmness and elegance. It was as if the vicissitudes of life and the scattering of ashes were all but a snap of his fingers. The snake's shadow retreated, only leaving behind pieces of martial cultivators under his feet. Yuan Lingxian held up those pieces of tungsten with heartache, and just as he was about to say something, he discovered that he couldn't raise his right hand. Creak. Black Sol stepped on the ground. Only now did Yuan Lingxian realize that not only was his opponent destroyed by his beloved armament, what was even more frightening was that his right hand couldn't even move. Could it be that he was also from the 4 great clans? No. Impossible. He had seen all the people from the 4 great clans. The only one whose inner strength was above his was Murong Chongfeng. Furthermore, this person had never appeared in the insignia of the 4 great clans before. Then who was he? In the Dragon War Empire, was there anyone more powerful than the 4 great families? Damn it! As if he wanted to spit out the shock in his heart, Yuan Lingxian madly roared, his voice trembling somewhat hard to conceal. There was a fishy taste in his throat, and a mouthful of blood overflowed from the corner of his mouth. Unable to hold on any longer, he was shaken out of the arena by the indescribable martial qi. His entire body moved towards Master Bai's side. Victory and defeat had already been decided. Master Bai subconsciously wanted to reach out and take it, but his palm followed with numbness, and his face was filled with unspeakable surprise. This was residual energy. Even he couldn't resist the remaining qi. How could this be? Whoosh. The crowd was in an uproar. Almost all of them stood up. Even Master Tu Lao, who was sitting in the judging panel. Genius, this is definitely a genius. Did you guys see? The people who held their breaths could no longer control their excited emotions, and the arena immediately sunk into an indescribable excitement. It was precisely because Beligaju hadn't participated in a single martial qi test before. That was why he was able to achieve this kind of breathtaking effect. If it was before this competition they were still doubting Beligaju's ability, now they were shaken to the point that even their blood was boiling. Just like what Master Tu Lao said, this was definitely a genius. Among them, the people from the superior compound and fine compound were so embarrassed that their faces were somewhat purple, as if they had been slapped in front of everyone. The good compound, on the other hand, had been applauding the entire time because ever since the first competition, they had been thoroughly conquered by the inferior compound, and even said that they would follow the inferior compound in the future. There were even a few students who ran over to ask Nangong Lai if they would accept any younger brothers. Nangong Lai blew his hair and was just about to refuse. Hellion Vivian faintly smiled and said one word, accept. Tu Su Feng listened to the sounds all around like a tide, and when he heard what was said he sipped a mouthful of tea and his eyes slightly brightened. This was Beligaju, the invincible Shindao of those years. For so many years he had lost his martial qi and trapped himself in the palace. He hadn't moved a single hand, to the extent that everyone had forgotten how terrifying he was when he moved. In the distance, the person who was currently watching this scene, the paper umbrella in his hand heavily fell to the ground, and his pupils swayed back and forth. Elder Huan, the Heaven's Dragon War Empire still had this kind of genius? Why wasn't he in their battle spirit forces? Logically speaking, for someone of this level, it was impossible to not be noticed. Huan Mingxiang stroked his shining white beard, his long sleeves floating in the air, like an immortal. Now, do you still feel that these people from the inferior compound don't have the qualifications to replace the superior compound students and enter our battle spirit forces? The person choked at Huan Mingxiang's words and let out a long sigh. However, as rational as he was still very cautious. This only proves that he can. I still haven't seen the other people's abilities. Then continue to watch. Huan Mingxiang stood steadily, but his heart was somewhat apprehensive. If that girl was competing in martial chi, he wasn't worried at all, but martial cultivation really wasn't something that ordinary people could play with. Especially after this competition, the people from the superior compound would very likely change their competitors. If that was the case, then the person she would face would be Murong Chongfeng. Excluding the Wu Shuang Gongzi from the martial cultivation aristocratic family, Murong Chongfeng, this person, was the most talented person in martial cultivation that they had discovered so far. Could be seen how powerful he was. In addition, he was Master Tu Lao's disciple. Huan Mingxiang almost suspected that this competition would present a one-sided situation. And Hellion Vivian herself wasn't worried at all, directly walking towards Beligaju. Her walking posture was very handsome, as if she was leisurely taking a stroll in the back garden. Only when she arrived in front of Bailey Han Bing did she stop her footsteps, freeing one hand and raising it high. Beligaju also curved his lips, slightly raising his slender left hand. A handsome clap of hands sounded. The two people's bodies unexpectedly carried the same languid aura, almost making people feel that they were very compatible when standing together. Okay, it's my turn. Hellion Vivian brushed her sleeves, the corners of her mouth carrying a smile, emitting a faint evil aura. Chapter 165. On the other side, people were still silent, unable to extricate themselves from the shock of the previous match. On the other side, Hellion Vivian had already lightly jumped onto the stage. The teacher standing at the side stared blankly, as if he had just recovered from the previous match. He hurriedly adjusted his reading glasses, cleared his throat and said, "The first match, the inferior compound wins. The second match, the armament test, please prepare to enter the stage." Right now, the superior compound is under a lot of pressure. The figure stood up and faced Master Bai's direction to look. After that, he sat down again, his face calm and collected. This match is of the utmost importance to the entire competition. Even if the contestant chosen before is more powerful than the opponent's contestant, they'll still change people. Those new students from the superior compound were clearly a bit flustered from the blow of that match just now. The higher one stands, the more they can't afford to lose. For so many years they haven't lost once. However, it doesn't matter. Every team will have their own soul. The soul of this team from the superior compound is none other than Murong Chongfeng. The one surnamed Bai will definitely send Murong Chongfeng out. Not only is it for the sake of winning, but it's also for the sake of reigniting the superior compound's morale. Otherwise, if this match isn't won beautifully enough, it'll affect the next match's diviner. That's because no matter how outstanding a student is, when they truly enter the fighting arena, whether or not the leader can hold his ground is also very important. The figure's analysis wasn't wrong. After the teacher finished speaking, Master Bai stood up. "Head judge, our compound requests a change of people. In the competition, every compound only had one chance to change people. That's why, unlike the inferior compound, the other compounds would arrange for substitute students. This was so that during the competition, they could change out the competing compound at any time according to the situation. It was as everyone had expected. As expected, Master Bai changed places with Murong Chongfeng. Murong Chongfeng's handsome face tilted to the side as if he didn't care at all. He extended his hand and took off the weighted buckle on his wrist. His outstanding temperament actually made many people from the superior compound feel their blood surge. Did you guys see? Lord Murong is actually wearing a weighted buckle on his wrist. In other words, in the previous match against the fine compound, he was wearing a weighted buckle. Heavens! When we were at the fine compound, the speed at which he assembled the armaments was already very fast. I really don't dare to imagine what he'll look like after he removes the weight buckles. Murong Chongfeng had long been accustomed to these kinds of praises. The arrogance on his face was clearly visible. Even if he concealed it well, there was still a faint complacency leaking out from the corners of his mouth. Master Bai stroked his beard and regained his calm. He believed that as long as Lord Murong was here they would never lose. In the previous battle, it was only because they didn't know their opponent well enough that they didn't choose the right strategy. And in this match it could be said that they knew each other well. Not only was the other party a well-known good-for-nothing in the capital, he was also a hedonistic, arrogant and unreasonable person. He was pestering Lord Murong like a love-struck fool. This kind of person, any random student from the superior compound would be able to deal with him. However, just like what the shadow said, this time Master Bai let Murong Chongfeng out. Not only to let him win, the most important thing was to get back the face of the previous match. Now I will announce the rules of the second match. The teacher's line of sight slowly swept over the people below the stage. After waiting for them to quiet down, he said, different from the previous two matches, the second match is divided into two parts. The first part is a written test. The competition rules are very simple. Here Master Tu Lao has prepared the same armament components for you. You can think about what kind of armament you can assemble using them. You only need 2 or more armaments to win. The time limit is half an incense stick. If you don't complete the task within this half an incense stick's time, you will be directly eliminated. In other words, you can't proceed to the next part of the competition. If 2 people both write 2 or more armaments, the one with the most is the winner. After saying this, the teacher retreated to the side. 2 stone pillars slowly rose from the wooden stage. The armament components placed on each pillar were the same, but what made people feel that the most difficult part of this question was that those armament components were very scattered and also very unremarkable. To want to make a good armament from these armament components was originally very difficult, but now the Academy unexpectedly required the competitors to come up with at least 2 sets of plans. As expected of Master Tu Lao, even the questions he set were so tricky. Everyone thought, one after another, they looked towards Master Tu Lao's position. They saw that he didn't have much of a change in mood. Although this place wasn't far from the stage, his presbyopia also couldn't clearly see the appearance of the person on the stage. He only lightly stroked his beard. A pair of smiling eyes carried a sense of mystery. This year's students from the inferior compound are actually worth paying attention to. I really didn't expect that the one going on stage would actually be a girl. It seems that this match is getting more and more interesting. The judge sitting next to him glanced at him and laughed. Ah, Tu Lao, I say, your eyesight is getting worse and worse. Isn't that the Hellion family's good-for-nothing young lady? You don't recognize her? How could he recognize her? Right now all he's thinking about is that genius he saw at the Phoenix Pavilion. He doesn't even care about his own disciple. Why would he care about a completely unrelated person? Tu Lao put down the teacup in his hand. You guys should stop making fun of me. This year's inferior compound is indeed different from the rest. I admit this point. The other master's expression was slightly excited. Just now, that student from the martial chi test can directly enter the superior compound. Speaking of which, what is his origin in the end? How come this old man has never seen him before? Tu Lao also had the same doubts, but he himself wasn't very interested in the martial chi genius. What he wanted to see the most was that a dark horse could appear in this armament competition. You guys look. The air has already started writing. It wasn't known who in the crowd said this sentence. Everyone all retracted their gazes, their eyes brimming with astonishment. So fast. It's done. Murong Chongfeng only used a few minutes of time to put down the brush in his hand and hand it over to the teacher who was next to him. Please let the masters take a look. This is my answer. The teacher took the paper. He originally wanted to hand it over to Tu Lao, but Tu Lao lightly smiled and waved his hand, hinting him to hand it over to the master next to him. As expected of your disciple. In such a short time he came up with 3 sets of plans. The master who took the paper shook his head with envy in his eyes. This is simply a sure win. Regarding this kind of result, Tu Lao wasn't surprised. The corners of his mouth curved up. He still knew this disciple's ability, and it was indeed not bad. Chapter 166. But how could he be so assured that his opponent wouldn't overtake him? Without waiting for the paper to be collected, he had the teacher hand it in first. It was still those old words. Everything about this disciple of his was good, but his temperament was too impatient, too condescending. But it was also because Murong Chongfeng handed in his paper early that the audience below was like boiling water, their voices loud and dry. Lord Murong has won for sure, huh? Up until now, that woman hasn't even moved her brush. Only now did people notice that Hellion Vivian, who was standing to the side, really hadn't even moved her brush. Her fingers were only nimbly turning those armament components. Her thin lips seemed to be smiling, and no one knew what she was thinking. The judge wrinkled his brows and faintly reminded. There isn't much time left in this competition. I hope that the contestants can hurry up a bit. If they haven't handed in their paper by the time, we'll determine that they've been eliminated. He probably finally knew how to be nervous. Hellion Vivian finally picked up the brush, but her long, shapely eyebrows were wrinkled into a ball. That appearance seemed to indicate that this question was very difficult. Huan Mingxiang, who was standing not far away and watching the competition, let out a long sigh. This kind of question is indeed too difficult for a novice armament cultivator. Elder Huan also believes that this competition is won by the superior compound? The figure faintly smiled. This time I reckon that the superior compound is truly displaying their original strength. However, the people from the inferior compound are also not bad. To be able to compare to the superior compound to this extent, losing a match can't be considered too shameful. There's still the last fifth of time left. The judge looked at the sandalwood that was about to burn out and broke out in cold sweat for Hellion Vivian. But looking at Hellion Vivian's appearance, it seemed that she was still struggling with her brush. The people below the stage were already laughing. What did I say? She'll definitely make a fool of herself. Someone who relies on currying favor with others to come participate in the armament competition. This is originally a joke. Sister Jiao, you should also stop her. Hellion Jiao gently smiled. How can I stop her? Eldest sister has always liked this kind of situation. She was implying that Hellion Vivian liked to be in the limelight. Naturally, the young misses of the officials also heard it. They all picked up their fans to cover the ridicule at the corners of their mouths. The little seventh prince stared at the southeast corner of his body and found that his third brother's eyes were deeper than ever. Could it be that he had some sort of backup plan? He seemed to have noticed the little one's gaze. Baligaju slowly raised his eyes. The little seventh prince paused for a moment and immediately sat up straight. His round canine teeth were exposed as he stared seriously at the spectator stand. Why did he feel that the woman's expression was very similar to the expression of the dean when he was giving him homework? He didn't like to write either. Especially writing a long paragraph of words. Just thinking about it made him feel terrified. Could it be that the woman was so slow because she didn't know how to write? The seventh prince's bald little head fiercely wrinkled his little eyebrows. Then after the competition was over, he must properly get to know this woman. After all, it was simply too difficult to find someone in the academy whose handwriting was uglier than his. The last bit of incense fell to the ground. But Hellion Vivian finally put down the brush in her hand before the incense burned out. Murong Chongfeng coldly glanced at her. Your luck is pretty good. He thought that she would definitely be eliminated. He didn't expect that she would actually catch up at the last moment. However, even if it was like this, she would only be a joke. He knew better than anyone how much weight she had. Last time in Armament City, she was merely a blind cat that ran into a dead mouse. This time, when he saw her write the test paper, he could clearly see that she was in a difficult situation. Maybe the answers that were handed in were all randomly made up by her. A person like her was indeed only worthy of that poor and pedantic brat. Only, Murong Chongfeng looked at the side of her face that seemed to be stained with light under the sun. His hands clenched and he unexpectedly couldn't control himself as he said, Hellion Vivian, I'll give you one last chance. If you turn back, this lord will take into account our past relationship and make you lose less miserably. Ha ha ha, woman, what did I hear? This man actually used this kind of method to make you turn back. Yuan Ming's voice came from the celestial boundary space. His gaze was evil. How about it? Do you want to become the Lord's wife that everyone looks up to? Hellion Vivian indifferently retracted her gaze and looked at Murong Chongfeng. Her smiling face was light as if she was replying to Yuan Ming's words, but also as if she was saying to Murong Chongfeng, this is simply the best joke I've ever heard. Murong Chongfeng's back suddenly stiffened. His handsome side profile also became gloomy in that split second. The two people's voices were very small. The others didn't know what they were saying. They only saw them standing side by side. That kind of posture unexpectedly had a somewhat unclear lingering flavor. It can't be. Even now, that woman still can't forget Lord Murong. It's only a short time of waiting, yet she's rushing to talk to Lord Murong. She really has opened our eyes. A young girl who normally liked Murong Chongfeng very much sneered. Her words clearly looked down on Hellion Vivian. The person sitting next to her was also from the superior compound. He lightly laughed. I reckon she feels that she's going to lose and is currently asking Lord Murong to comfort her. Lord Murong wouldn't comfort a good-for-nothing. The young girl blew on her red fingers. She clearly came here to make a fool of herself. In a moment when the answer is announced, we'll just wait for her to lose face. Nangong Lai listened to those discussions. Nangong Lai pretended to let out a long sigh. His body casually leaned backwards, his two hands behind his head. His thin lips carried an evil aura. Intentionally or unintentionally, he looked towards Beligaju. AI, unforgettable old feelings. Ah. Looks like I have to prepare to go on stage in a moment. Love can make a woman completely lose her ability to judge, so much so that she can't distinguish between friend and foe. Captain clearly intends to throw the game. Aju, what do you say? Beligaju was somewhat absent-minded. He slightly leaned his body. His deep eyes flashed with a strange vastness as he sank into contemplation. Suddenly he crossed his hands and supported his chin. The corners of his mouth slowly pulled out an ice-cold smile. I said, you better shut up. After saying this, he stood up. Aju, where are you going? Nangong Lai was excited. Was he going to duel? For the sake of stealing a woman or something? Beligaju glanced back. Even though he was draped in a long windbreaker, one could still feel his tall and straight back. His muscles were distinct and well-built. That pure and resolute ancient aura was displayed on his body. That was the elegance accumulated over the years. He slowly curved his thin lips. His gaze on Hellion Vivian's body emitted a demonically cold light. Chapter 167. Beligaju lowered his eyes, his black hair falling down, making people unable to see his expression. Go get a bird cage. When did you become interested in raising birds? Nangong Lai oddly raised his eyebrows. Beligaju's voice was neither fast nor slow. It's not birds, it's people. Hearing this, Nangong Lai's scalp went numb. No, it can't be what I think it is. Aju flew into a rage out of humiliation, planning to lock up the eldest miss of the Hellion family and raise her. Listen to me, I was just joking. Nangong Lai immediately grabbed Nangongju's arm, his whole body itching to wrap around him, just to hold him back. Captain definitely won't be lenient, did you forget? What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank that guy Murong Chongfeng will be? Beligaju deeply looked at him. Just when Nangong Lai was about to be unable to hold on after being stared at by him, Beligaju finally sat back down, his eyes cold. You're right. Huh. Nangong Lai swallowed his saliva. In fact, he already forgot what he just said. Beligaju extended his hand, wanting to turn the ring on his finger, but discovered that there was a thin piece of white cloth tied there. His black eyes deepened. What she loves the most is money. Who knows what rank the others will be? Including him. Just as Nangong Lai and Beligaju were talking, Master Tu Lao on the stage had already started reading Murong Chongfeng's test paper. It was written very well and every reason was very sufficient. The results could be considered excellent. The other masters also thought so, nodding to each other. When it came to Hellion Vivian's test paper, one of the masters didn't even bother to turn it over. The result of the competition was already obvious. What was the difference between looking and not looking? But suddenly, Master Tu Lao actually grasped that roll of paper, his fingers trembling. So it's like this, so it turns out that ferrotungsten can also have this kind of effect, changing the shape of armaments. Why didn't I think of this before? He wouldn't have been so excited if the test paper was just a bunch of random answers. However, it was a logical thought process. Every part of the test paper was placed in a very suitable position by her. It was as if these parts were originally an armament, but after taking them apart they were then reassembled. Furthermore, each new design was even more amazing than the previous one. What was most inconceivable was that she had actually written an entire page with no less than 8 sets of proposals. Even he could only think of 7 sets at most. This girl actually. What was even more shocking was that she even added a note at the end. There are other solutions, but this brush writing is too confusing. I suggest that the masters change to oral answers in the future. Thank you. There was another plan. How was that possible? The person sitting next to Master Tu Lao was also shocked. They looked at each other in dismay, their eyes trembling. Hellion Vivian. Master Tu Lao muttered this name, his fingers clenching. This person is definitely a genius. I want to go down and see what this girl looks like. The other master extended his left hand, blocking Master Tu Lao. No, Tu Lao, wait a moment. This is a competition after all, we must follow the competition rules. Besides, she is Ji Zun's disciple. Maybe she just happened to know the answer before and memorized it word for word. Tu Lao was slightly stunned. That's true, Ji Zun, that guy can probably make 10 sets. However, to be able to memorize so many armaments parts, you won't be able to find a second one in White Academy. That girl is definitely not like what others say, a waste. I know this. The Grand Master nodded his head and stroked his beard. What this old man means is that it's clear that she has won this round. However, as for how strong she is, we still need to see her actual operation, which is the second part of the armament assembly. Haha, your suggestion is good. Tu Lao sat down again, but his eyes were not as calm as before. Everyone looked puzzledly at the two masters who were laughing loudly and frowned in confusion. It must be eldest sister's answer that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. That's why the great masters acted this way. As Hellion Jiao Air spoke, she sighed rather vexedly. When the young ladies heard this, they all laughed. What kind of answer do you think she will write? It shouldn't be something like I don't know, huh? Facing the ridicule from below the stage, Hellion Vivian did not open her mouth to say anything, only twirling the brush in her hand. Even her posture was as languid and clear as if she was taking a stroll in a garden. If it had to be described, then it would be the afternoon sun, beautiful mountains and clear waters, paired with a cup of Earl black tea. Twirling the brush was very normal, but when you really drank it in your mouth, then you would know what a noble was. Hellion Vivian, she was this kind of person. That kind of carefreeness, as if everything in front of her was just a game. Speaking of which, to her it was indeed so. Parts assembly, she had played with it since childhood. The modern-day K7's process was much more complicated than this. Cold weapon parts to her could be said to be a piece of cake. What's more, when she came to Dragon War Empire, she relied on parts assembly to become rich. Although she might not be able to compare to those masters in other areas, the biggest marketing feature of her shop was from ordinary martial artists to martial families. In other words, no matter what kind of armament parts, good or bad, she had come into contact with them all. Moreover, in her mind there was no clear definition of good or bad. As long as a part was pressed into a suitable position, it could collide and produce unexpected power. Master Bai did not know what Hellion Vivian was thinking and thought that she was speechless. Facing Tu Sifeng, who was sitting not far from him, he said with a very regretful appearance, "What did I say? Let the principal change the person to go on stage." It seems that the second part of the competition does not need to continue. This is destined to be an elimination round. Tu Sifeng did not respond, only turning his head he said to Nangong Lai, "You prepare." When the people from the inferior compound heard this, they lowered their heads. Even the principal said this, it seemed that there was no hope. But I knew it would be this kind of result. The young girl from the superior compound faced Murong Chongfeng and smiled sweetly. "You are our Dragon War Empire's most outstanding genius. It would be unreasonable if you don't win." Murong Chongfeng knew who that young girl was, and because he knew, he smiled gently. After all, there was profit to be gained. The result is not out yet, let's wait on the side. Although he said this, Murong Chongfeng's appearance was that he was determined to win. Okay. The young girl looked at Hellion Vivian complacently. Hellion Vivian did not even bother to throw her. That young girl clenched her teeth, waiting for the result to be announced. Then she would properly ridicule her. Finally, Master Tu Lao, who was standing at the referee's table, stood up. His gaze surveyed the crowd below, his voice unhurriedly. The winner of the first part of the armament competition. Chapter 168. Murong Chongfeng raised his chin, the side of his face looking incomparably arrogant, as if he'd already anticipated that he would win. He'd already taken a step forward, intending to accept everyone's worship. He didn't expect that Master Tu Lao would actually lower his voice and loudly read out the name Hellion Vivian. Snap. The thing in the figure's hand dropped. Even Huan Mingxiang also didn't anticipate this kind of result. He stood there blankly, simply too late to make any sort of reaction. The smile at the corners of Murong Chongfeng's mouth, in that split second, clearly stiffened in place. He was stunned as he widened his pair of long and narrow eyes. The footsteps he'd taken also stiffened in place. His fingers slightly trembled as he turned his head and faced Wei Wei to look at her. The blood on his face completely drained away. How could this be? How could he lose to a woman with no redeeming qualities? Everyone was stunned by this result. They opened their mouths, forgetting to close them. Right now, the field was so quiet that it was as if even the sound of a pin dropping could be heard. No, it can't be. The one who won was that trash? That young girl who was still clamoring, and Helian Jiaoer's expressions cracked at the same time. The ridicule that was originally going to come out of their mouths were all swallowed back into their throats. Their cheeks were green and white. It was a wonderful sight. In the midst of everyone's astonishment, Helian Vivian, dressed in white and blue, slowly walked forward. Her expression didn't change at all. It was still that small face with a smile that wasn't a smile, but at this moment, it made people unable to move their eyes away. Her clothes were also very simple, without any matching. Her long sleeves floated in the air, her ink-black hair fluttered. The contrast between black and white actually brought out a peerless beauty. The spectators stared blankly at this scene. What kind of joke was this? A trash actually defeated Murong Chongfeng. When did this woman become so awesome? Didn't she know nothing? Murong Chongfeng simply couldn't accept this kind of result. He, the dignified Murong Chongfeng, actually lost to a trash who hadn't even touched the slightest bit of armament before. Murong Chongfeng calmed down the undulation in his chest and turned his head to face the judging panel not far away. Masters, I wrote 3 proposals, one more than what you requested. I really don't understand how I lost. Master Tu Lao heard the dissatisfaction in Murong Chongfeng's tone. His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and soon after he sighed. This disciple of his was still too proud and arrogant. It's true that you've written 3 proposals and they're all very good. The great master sitting next to Tu Tian knew that it wasn't a good time for Tu Tian to open his mouth, so he simply took over Murong Chongfeng's words. His voice carried a smile. Lord, you're already very formidable. However, your opponent has written twice as many proposals as you, and every proposal is more outstanding than yours. The implication of his words was that what else was there to be unconvinced about? Murong Chongfeng's face shook as if he couldn't believe it. Twice as many proposals as mine? Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. Those parts that Master gave, at most only 5 proposals can be made into an armament. 7 or 8 proposals, it's simply impossible. Hearing Murong Chongfeng say that it's impossible, the light in the Helian Jiaoer's eyes changed. She bit her red lips and said, Great Master, is there some problem in this? Even if someone is Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, this kind of unforeseen event shouldn't occur. You're saying that this old man is covering up for Helian Vivian? That great master's face slightly sunk and said in an unkind tone, Since you feel that me being the judge is unfair, how about you be the judge? When the Helian Jiaoer heard this, her face was embarrassed. I didn't say that great master was covering up for anyone, I only felt that perhaps someone tampered. Otherwise, how could that slut possibly win? Enough. At this time, great master Tu Lao, who hadn't spoken until now, coldly opened his mouth. I didn't want to speak because I didn't want your superior compound to be too embarrassed. This result was set by me. If Miss Helian still has objections, you can also cancel this old man's qualifications as a judge. As he spoke, he looked towards where great master Bai was sitting. His voice carried a strong displeasure. So this is the superior compound student that great master Bai has always been so proud of. You really have broadened this old man's horizons. If the superior compound students are all like this, then I suggest that the principal should cancel the superior compound as soon as possible. Great master Bai stiffened. His appearance was as if he couldn't wait to find a hole in the ground and crawl into it. Tu Su Feng smiled gently and didn't reply. Great master Tu Lao was really angry this time. It wasn't only the Helian Jiaoer. After everyone from the superior compound heard these words, they all felt as if they'd been slapped in the face. Everyone who was originally still doubting didn't dare to be doubtful at this moment. Great Master Tu Lao was the heir's master, and even he said that there weren't any problems with the competition. Then the one who won was really Helian Vivian. Tu Lao didn't care about everyone's reaction. He extended his hand and handed the rolled-up paper to the teacher standing to the side. Let him see for himself. The teacher lowered his head and handed the paper that belonged to Hellion Vivian into Murong Chongfeng's hand. Murong Chongfeng looked at those clear lines of thought, concise narration, but every word poked at the key points of the answers. His pupils swayed back and forth. He'd never thought that those parts could be used like this. Especially the sixth line that mentioned it. Not only him, perhaps even his master didn't know that the most worthless parts in their eyes would have such a big effect. She really wrote 7 or 8 sets of plans? In the distance, a figure's voice trembled. Elder Huan, why didn't you say earlier that you knew such a martial genius? Huan Mingxiang glared. What do you want this old man to say? This old man didn't know that this girl knew martial arts. This old man only knew that her attainments in martial qi were extraordinary. As for the rest, this old man only saw it today. He was also very gloomy. He'd stayed with that girl for more than 10 days, yet he still didn't know the details of that girl. Heavens, what kind of monsters did the inferior compound take in this year? The figure's mouth said monsters, yet his eyes shined as if he'd discovered a treasure. Huan Mingxiang stroked his chin and muttered to himself. No wonder that Brat Tu Su wanted to take on the role of the inferior compound's principal this year. Since he's that one, then the student by his side who chose divination. Who could it be? Elder Huan, what are you saying? Who's who? The figure's thoughts were only on Hellion Vivian. Right now he couldn't wait to see what she'd look like when she personally assembled the martial arts. Huan Mingxiang curved his lips into a smile, his eyes carrying a deep meaning. Nothing. I said that what you said was correct. This year's inferior compound took in a bunch of monsters. Murong Chongfeng, who was standing on the stage, heard the sound of a gasp beside his ear. His body stiffened. Did he really lose? Lost to the girl he disdained the most. Chapter 169. Murong Chongfeng pinched the paper in his hand. When he looked at Hellion Vivian again, his eyes carried an unprecedented blankness. That kind of blankness made the young girl who adored him clench her fists in hatred. Her red nails dug into her palms. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and tried her best to maintain her disdain. It's just that she wrote a lot of plans. If I were Grandmaster Zizun's disciple, maybe I could also write this many plans. Who doesn't know how to recite? Whether or not you win depends on the actual assembly of armaments. Although what the young girl said wasn't wrong, the students sitting at the inferior compound really wanted to tell her. Hellion Vivian, that girl really didn't recite. When she was in class, other than sleeping, she was lying on her stomach. She made the teachers so angry that they didn't expect her to wake up. Who can't recite? Look at how simple she makes it sound. If you have the ability, go up and compete with boss. I guarantee that you won't even be able to recognize all of the armaments. Those people from the good compound already truly regarded Hellion Vivian as their boss. It wasn't only because of this match. As early as in the previous match between the good compound and the inferior compound, they were already shocked by Hellion Vivian's indescribably fast speed. What's more, only those who had come into contact with armaments knew that memorizing so many parts in such a short amount of time and immediately remembering where they should be placed wasn't as simple as it sounded. In their opinion, these proud sons of heaven from the superior compound couldn't even compare to them. At the very least, when they lost, they admitted defeat. These people from the superior compound only knew how to continuously find excuses for themselves. Wait until boss really makes a move, then they'll be honest. This was the first time that the young girl was looked at with this kind of gaze by the people from the good compound. Putting aside her family background, she was someone who entered the superior compound as soon as she entered the school. Every time she walked out, she was envied by others. Now these people from the good compound had some guts, daring to talk back to her. Then let's look at the actual assembly of armaments. Just as the anger was about to reach a state of mutual hostility, a faint smile came from the center of the field. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a half-smile, but that smile did not reach her eyes. She slowly walked over, looking more languid and handsome than the average woman. Then she turned her face to the side and moved her slender fingers. With a click, she seemed to have undone something on her right wrist and lazily threw it to the side. Her posture was very calm, and there was an indescribable evil charm in her elegance. Just like the evaluation people gave her in modern times, Hellion Wei Wei was definitely the ace of aces. She had a neutral beauty that made people jealous. Not only could she be as warm as the clear sun, but she could also be as handsome as a queen in a painting. Everyone was stunned as they looked at the heavy buckle that she had casually thrown to the side. All of them sucked in a deep breath. Had she been wearing a weighted buckle all along? Wasn't it said that only the students of the superior compound wouldn't be unable to lift their hands due to the weight? If one's cultivation hadn't reached a certain level, it would be impossible to withstand the gravitational pull of the heavy buckle, right? But this woman had actually been wearing it all along, winning from the good compound to the superior compound. Moreover, the difference between her and Murong Chongfeng was that she would appear in every match. How did she do it in the end? Even the fine compound's competitor was somewhat inconceivable. In the end, he couldn't help but turn his head and look at Heizei. I really did suffer a crushing defeat. At that time, I shouldn't have been unconvinced. All right, boy, losing to her isn't anything shameful. Heizei punched that person's shoulder and silently thought. Wait until you find out that she's the boss of the profound heavens that you worship the most, then you'll feel even more ashamed. How could that young girl know this? She only saw Hellion Vivian's indifferent appearance and found her increasingly unpleasing to the eye. She clenched her hands, wishing that she could rush up and tear Hellion Vivian apart. Hellion Jiaoer looked at her, leaned over next to her ear and said a few words. That young girl's eyes lit up and she slightly lifted her chin. Since Miss Hellion is so confident, why don't you make all of those plans that you've written? That way we can see whether you really know how to do it or if you've only memorized the information that Grandmaster Zizun gave you. Cramming and whatnot can't prove anything at all. The competition's time was limited. Even if this slut could assemble armaments, she couldn't possibly make 7 or 8 armaments in the remaining time of half a stick of incense. Moreover, she had to use the same parts. What's more, these parts weren't made of very good tungsten iron. Some of them simply couldn't be used. She actually wanted to see what this slut would do. It's fine if you want me to make all of them. Hellion Vivian smiled. Her eyes swept over to Sufeng below the stage. However, according to the previous competition rules, I simply didn't need to make so many armaments. Now that the superior compounds people have raised an additional request, then shouldn't the prize money after the competition also be doubled? The young girl sneered. Prize money? You should first win before we talk about it. I've never done anything that doesn't get paid. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. In the next second, her expression became incomparably fierce. Otherwise, why should I listen to your request? Do you really think that the whole world is your mother and that you can do whatever you want? The young girl was blocked by Hellion Vivian's words until her entire body started to tremble. She firmly clenched her own hands. Hellion Vivian, don't you just want money? As long as you can truly make all of these armaments, I'll pay. Good. Hellion Vivian gave the final word. The corners of her mouth carried a smile. Then it settled. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and let out a long sigh. Captain Weiwei definitely did it on purpose. Aju, no wonder she became that Hong Wan of yours. The degree of her black-bellied is practically on par with yours. How could she win against someone and still make them pay? Sinister, too sinister. Baligaju didn't speak. His slender legs were slightly crossed. His left hand, wrapped in a white cloth, lazily supported his lower jaw. His pitch-black eyes were like the midnight, beautiful and inconceivably playful. Nangong Lai snorted. He knew that the more black-hearted a person was, the more they could arouse Aju's interest. It seemed that their great Captain Hellion wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of being locked up in a golden cage in the future. It couldn't be helped. Aju was just that wicked. In the past, that group of ministers were still guessing what kind of woman the royal family who had never been close to women would like. In the end, they confirmed that their target was someone like Hellion Jiaoer. She looked innocent and unaffected, gentle, a jasper who was untainted by the dust of the world. At that time, he wanted to tell them that Aju's taste was much heavier than what they had imagined. It was just that this man had a misophobia that couldn't stand any woman. If he really had to choose, Aju reckoned that he would like the kind of woman who would reach out her claws at him. Chapter 170. It wasn't because this type of girl was relatively rare, but rather because this man liked to break off the claws of his prey. Nangong Lai was suspicious. What would he do if he really did that kind of thing in the future? He reckoned that there would only be 2 situations. One was that he found the person dirty and kicked the person out halfway through. The other was that he would first remove that person's claws if he found them pleasing to the eye. Whether or not he did it wasn't the main point. Thinking like this, Nangong Lai always felt that Captain Hulyan's future was really incomparably worrying. The three grandmasters sitting on the judging panel were also worried for Wei Wei. After all, with so many plans, even they wouldn't be able to make all of them within the time it takes to burn half a stick of incense. Not to mention Wei Wei, who hadn't obtained any qualifications as an armament master. They always felt that this competition was more or less bullying. If Shizun came back and knew that they treated his disciple like this, he would definitely flip out on the spot. Tu Tian and Yun Xiu glanced at each other. Master Yun Xiu stepped forward to persuade Hellion Vivian. Girl, just like you said, the Academy's competition rules don't require you to make so many armaments. You can completely ignore what other people say. Thank you, Master. Hellion Vivian knew that these old people were sincerely thinking for her, and the smile on her face became more sincere. However, this student has already decided to accept Miss Mu's proposal. Hearing her call herself a student, Yun Xiu changed his previous impression of her and deeply sighed. It's still Jizun, that guy who has a pair of good eyes. Accepting such a sensible disciple was because they had previously listened too much to the rumors. Plus, thinking of this, Yun Xiu smiled and continued, Girl, do it well. This old man believes that you can succeed. As a master of the armament assembly, and as well as having inextricable relations with young Master Wu Shuang, Master Yun unexpectedly spoke to Hellion Vivian like this. This made the young girl surnamed Mu even more jealous. She coldly glared at Wei Wei. She actually wanted to see how this slut would assemble a large pile of useless parts. She's just a dead duck who refuses to admit her mistake. Unexpectedly, there's actually someone who believes her. Master Tu Lao stroked his shining white long beard. His voice was neither mild nor mild. Chong Feng, since Miss Hellion has agreed, then you should also follow what you wrote before and make all the armaments you want to make. Otherwise, this competition would be too unfair. He didn't say the last sentence out loud. Firstly, it was because he really didn't want to see his beloved disciple lose face like this. Secondly, since Wei Wei herself had already agreed, he also wouldn't say anything more. Perhaps, in his heart, he also wanted to know whether the plans that Hellion Wei Wei had written on the paper would be effective in the end. Similarly, as an armament master, he couldn't be more clear. Sometimes thinking about it was one thing, but when the parts were actually put together in one's hands, it was another thing altogether. The two people didn't have much time. They both had half an incense stick's worth of time, but Murong Chongfeng only needed to make 3 armaments, while Hellion Vivian needed to make at least 7. However, the people from the superior compound still didn't feel that they'd taken advantage of her. As before, they mocked and ridiculed. Do you guys think that trash can really assemble all these parts together? He's just bragging. If she said she could make one, I'd believe her. 7 and only half an incense stick's worth of time. Even if she wanted to be in the limelight, she wouldn't play around like that. She only wrote it correctly, yet she doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. She really is a country bumpkin from the inferior compound who hasn't seen the world at all. She's the same as her mother. The student from the superior compound hadn't even finished speaking when he saw a shadow cover his eyes. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes to look at her. Her peripheral vision carried an unprecedented chill. I've changed my mind. I don't want the money, but there's one thing, this person. She pointed at the young girl who'd mentioned her mother. The corners of her mouth carried a bloodthirsty smile. I want her to slap herself 10 times. That young girl suddenly stood up. Hellion Vivian, who do you think you are? You're nothing but a trash. This is White Academy. Don't use your city's arrogant and hedonistic behavior here. Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. She suddenly leaned over and grabbed that young girl's collar. Her voice carried a roguish tone. I'm an arrogant and hedonistic hedonist. Otherwise, you guys also wouldn't have raised that request. The competition will continue as usual. As she spoke, she faced Master Bai and looked over. Only when the time comes, your superior compound will definitely lose miserably. If you don't believe me, you can compare. Master Bai clenched both of his hands. As a master of the superior compound, his pressure was even greater than that of the students. For so many years, the superior compound had always been completely superior to every other compound. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire, even in the entire Divine Continents Academies, they occupied an extremely important position. But this kind of superior victory was unexpectedly going to end here with him. He simply couldn't imagine if the superior compound really lost this competition, would he still be able to sit in this position that he'd just promoted? The superior compound had to win. No matter what kind of price they had to pay. Not only Master Bai, even the other students of the superior compound also thought this way. That's why after Hellion Vivian spoke those words, they all simultaneously looked towards that young girl. This was the so-called top students. In the face of victory or defeat, they'd display their unprecedented selfishness, only for the sake of winning. Hellion Vivian knew this group of people's characteristics, which was why she'd temporarily change her request. Because what that young girl said just now already touched her bottom line. Her bottom line was very simple. She didn't care if they scolded her, but if they humiliated her family, she didn't mind letting these people know how ruthless her methods were. The young girl looked at that pair of eyes that seemed to be sealed by ice, and subconsciously shrunk her shoulders. How did this woman suddenly become so difficult to deal with, hateful? She originally wanted to ridicule her with a few words, but didn't expect that she'd be forced into a dilemma by this woman. If she didn't agree when the time came for the superior compound to really lose, she'd become the main culprit. She certainly didn't want to be ostracized by the people of the superior compound in the future. She'd seen the people of the superior compound ostracize others, probably because of their background. They'd never acted like a shrew grabbing someone's hair when they didn't see eye to eye. They'd only indifferently walk away when you wanted to blend in with them and chat with them. So much so that after they saw you they disdainfully curled their thin lips. She absolutely didn't want to be treated like that. The young girl clenched her teeth, raised her head and said, "Isn't it just a few slaps? If you really win, this young lady will accompany you to the end." This good-for-nothing was only bluffing. She didn't believe that she could make 7 armaments in such a short time, unless she grew 3 heads and 6 arms. Chapter 171. Not to mention that she didn't believe it, even Murong Chongfeng held a skeptical attitude towards all of this. However, Hellion Vivian didn't shrink back at all after hearing what she said. She simply let go of her collar and smiled faintly. "Since the conditions have been agreed upon, then let's begin." As she spoke, she tied up her long hair and picked up the armament component in front of her. At this moment, her expression was especially serious. Her pair of eyes that were like the night sky were as tranquil as the ocean. It was as if as long as she stood there and slightly smiled, a cool breeze would come. Since the matter had already reached this stage, the teacher announced loudly, "The second part of the armament competition begins now. Will the 3 referees please light the incense?" But as soon as his voice fell, Hellion Vivian moved her hands. Her speed was so fast that everyone didn't have time to react. Even their eyes didn't have any misgivings about this side's movements. Hellion Vivian had already started. This was the first time that she personally assembled an armament in front of all the students. She turned her face to the side, her thick eyelashes slightly drooping down. Her slender and fair fingers didn't seem to be assembling armaments, but rather like a musician playing the piano. Every finger was fully utilized by her to the appropriate position, beautifully and nimbly changing them. The components in her hand also followed her movements, presenting a smooth and flowing line. Apart from the ka-ka sound, everyone simply couldn't see clearly how her fingers moved. The only thing that could be felt was that this scene was dazzlingly beautiful. That kind of natural and unforced movement, as if those armament components were merely toys that she casually picked up. First, when Murong Chongfeng had just started assembling, Hellion Vivian's side had already used the first set of plans to assemble those components into an armament. Her thin lips faintly curved. Under the contrast of her white clothes, she actually looked somewhat irresistible. The second armament. Hellion Vivian's palm turned over and a silver whip took shape. Murong Chongfeng was the closest to Hellion Vivian, so he was the clearest about how those originally scattered components turned into armaments in her hands. His eyes flickered uncontrollably and the components in his hand all fell to the ground with a crash. If it was said that when Beligaju won before, the scene was deathly silent. But now these people couldn't take their eyes off it. Following the rhythmic sound, they couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Isn't this too fast? How could he be so fast? Only Master Tu Lao, at the same time as he was amazed, he also carried a trace of regret. This Hellion Vivian was fast, but she was not as fast as the girl he had met at the Phoenix Pavilion. He thought that someone who could come up with so many proposals would be better than that girl. But now it seemed that it was not possible. The third armament. Logically speaking, the assembly of armaments would become more and more difficult the further one progressed. After all, the plan was also like this, from simple to difficult. However, this didn't seem to have any effect on Hellion Vivian. On the contrary, it made her pair of eyes look increasingly bright like water, resplendent like the stars. Murong Chongfeng looked at the other's exquisite facial features. His heart unexpectedly felt as if it had been ruthlessly plucked by something sour and numb. Lord. The young girl outside the field looked at this scene and firmly bit her thin lips. Hurry up and pick up your things, ah. Lord had never used this kind of gaze to look at anyone before. That kind of expression, as if he was seduced by the other party, simply deserved to die. Murong Chongfeng finally returned to his senses. He bent down and picked up those components. He quickly made the first armament, but he was unable to concentrate his energy. Everyone was stunned. The fourth armament. Hellion Vivian casually fiddled with her own neck and continued to bury her head. Hua. The crowd instantly went into an uproar. The fourth one she really already made four. It can't be, Lord just finished one. What about time? The most important thing is time. In a flash, everyone's gaze fell on that half-incense stick that was about to burn out. A nervousness they had never felt before engulfed their entire bodies. The sandalwood incense was about to burn out. The young girl clenched her fists tightly. That pair of eyes stared unwaveringly at the half-incense stick in the distance. That kind of look in her eyes was as if she couldn't wait for the wind to blow a bit stronger and quickly let that incense burn out. Hellion Jiao Air sat right next to her. Her left hand covered the back of Hellion Jiao Air's hand, her voice brewing malice. Don't worry, that woman won't be able to win. It's only 4 armaments, yet she already used up about 4/5 of the time. She simply won't be able to finish the remaining 3 armaments. Just as Hellion Jiao said this, a paw sound rang out. The 5th armament was single-handedly placed on the table by Hellion Vivian. Her gaze looked up as if she was also looking at the length of the sandalwood incense stick. There's still 2 left. There's still 2 left and she'll win. There's already no time, look at that incense stick. Everyone knew that young Master Wu Shuang was the fastest person to make armaments. How much ability did this Hellion Vivian have? She couldn't possibly be faster than young Master Wu Shuang, right? What's more, there wasn't enough time. If she reluctantly assembled these armaments together, and didn't follow the plan she had previously proposed, then she would still lose. But what the crowd didn't expect was that in the next second, Hellion Vivian actually raised her hand and removed something from her wrist. It was the gravity buckle that they had seen before. What kind of joke was this? How many gravity buckles did she actually have on her hand? Someone noticed that Hellion Vivian switched hands. Look, she's starting to use her left hand as the main one, and her right hand as the support. Her speed seems to have doubled from before. Could it be that she simply didn't use her full strength before? This is too frightening. It was indeed frightening. As a White Academy's great master, Yun Xiu didn't have the confidence that he could do this. Although this was only a beginner's armament assembly, and didn't use any hard to fiddle with 0 years, even him making 4 was already his limit. He'd always thought that Murong Chongfeng was a genius. Apart from the armament assembly's young master Wu Shuang, there wasn't anyone who could surpass him in armament attainments. After all, at such a young age there really weren't many juniors who could catch up to him. But when he saw today's competition and saw Hellion Vivian's assembly technique, he finally understood what was called a genius among geniuses. How could there be such a powerful girl? And this girl was actually always treated by them as a good-for-nothing waste. The 7th one, she's making the 7th one. Inexplicably, silence appeared in the venue. Ever since Hellion Vivian finished displaying the 6th armament, everyone couldn't help but hold their breaths. Great Master Bai couldn't sit still any longer. With a sudden sound, he stood up from the wooden chair. His eyes looked towards that half-incense stick's worth of time, and the corners of his mouth slowly hooked up into a smile. She won't win because there's already no time. Great Master Bai hadn't finished speaking the word time when a clear pock sound resounded throughout the entire venue. Like the sound of Sanskrit, it didn't recede for a long time. Chapter 172. Wei Wei's fair hand placed the last armaments on the table. Master Bai looked at this scene in disbelief. Even his figure seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. However, at this time the allotted sandalwood incense had just finished burning. The incomparably arrogant young girl's face suddenly turned deathly white, forcibly retreating a large step, almost falling onto her seat, as if her soul had been sucked out of her body. That waste actually made all of them. How could it be like this? Lost. The heir actually really lost. Furthermore, this was under the premise that the opponent had to make 7 armaments. The young girl recalled the promise she had made before, and unexpectedly had a kind of unspeakable regret. Hellion Vivian didn't look at her and, according to the competition rules, placed all 7 armaments on a tray, letting the teacher take them over and let the judges appraise them. Yun Xiu restrained the nervousness in his heart, and lightly picked up the first armament. Just as he was about to look, he saw Tu Tian, who was sitting beside him, suddenly stand up, his face carrying an indescribable excitement. That young girl couldn't see Master Tu Tian's expression clearly, and thought that there was still a way to turn things around. She lifted her eyes and said, "Master Tu Tian, is there something wrong?" Hearing this, everyone was sluggish. In such a short amount of time, making 7 armaments in one go, it was indeed impossible to avoid making mistakes. Could it be that there really was something wrong? The students of the good compound all looked towards Master Tu Tian. What they didn't expect was that the old man unexpectedly seemed to have discovered some rare treasure, his voice carrying excitement. "Soaring flames, this armament is actually soaring flames." Soaring flames? After hearing these 4 words, Yun Xiu suddenly turned his head and snatched the armament from Tu Tian's hand. His eyes also started to sway. "It really is soaring flames. How is this possible? We obviously only provided ordinary parts. How could it reach such a high attack power?" "Hey Yun Xiu, what are you snatching for? This old man still hasn't finished looking." Tu Tian unhappily pushed away his good friend, and touched the outline of that armament again. "It's the mechanical position." She changed the original mechanical position of this part. At this point Tu Lao realized that the treasure in his hand had been snatched away, and he immediately became furious. Everyone looked on blankly as the 2 masters, who had always been calm and steady, unexpectedly, for the sake of an armament, fought over it. Immediately they looked at Wei Wei, who was standing on the stage, with some disbelief. What kind of armament did she actually make? Flames soaring to the heavens. Tu Sufeng's voice slowly rang out from the corner of the arena, giving people a kind of tireless gentleness. Attack power 100%, defense power 100%, able to gather the martial qi in a martial artist's body at one point, transforming into wind, resisting fire. What? 200 martial cultivators? What this woman made was a double 100 armament. Listening to Tu Sufeng's explanation, everyone felt somewhat dizzy and confused. For a moment, they actually felt that this wasn't some inter-school competition at all, but rather a national armament competition. Although they didn't have a special understanding of martial cultivation, they were still martial artists. Although they weren't familiar with the scientific names of martial cultivation, they clearly knew what offensive and defensive power were. Whether or not an armament was good or not, these 2 points were the most important. Right now, this flame-soaring sky that Hellion Vivian made, not only was its offensive and defensive power extraordinarily high, it could even resist fire in battle. This was simply comparable to the armaments that young Master Wu Shuang made. Hellion Vivian, was she really still that trash? Involuntarily, everyone's eyes trembled as they looked towards the young girl standing on the stage. She was only 15 years old and hadn't received any professional training in martial cultivation. She couldn't even ignite a crystal ball. Yet her attainments in martial cultivation surpassed young Master Murong. If she also possessed martial qi, how terrifying would that be? Everyone didn't even dare to think about it. Hellion Vivian's reputation as trash was thoroughly broken on this day. However, no one would have guessed that not long after she would appear in front of everyone with a different appearance. At that time, people would know what was called a true genius queen. The result of the competition is already very clear. Great Master Yun Xiu smiled as he stood up. That smile on his face was enough to see how happy he was. With one hand behind his back, he waved towards Hellion Vivian with the other. "The winner, please come to the stage." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly as she walked forward, but heard a clang. Great Master Tu Lao, who was originally standing to the side, instantly dropped the teacup in his hand and shattered into pieces. Girl, why are you here? Tu Lao's presbyopic eyes opened wide and even his voice became abnormal. Your name is Hellion Vivian? Hellion Vivian nodded her head and casually spoke with the courtesy of an old man. Elder Tu, long time no see. Tu Lao took a step forward as if he wanted to hold Hellion Vivian's hand. Unexpectedly, he spoke somewhat incoherently. You don't know how long this old man has been searching for you in the capital after we parted at the Phoenix Pavilion. I've turned the entire city upside down but still couldn't find your shadow. The 9-tune silver snake you made last time was simply too amazing. Can you make another one for this old man? This old man still has a lot of parts here. You can use them as you please, use them as you please. Use them as you please? Yun Xiu looked at his good friend in astonishment. One must know that although Tu Lao's armament parts couldn't compare to their armament guilds, they were still very rare in the Dragon War Empire. A person who viewed armament parts as his life actually let this girl use his things as she pleased? Moreover, from Tu Lao's words he seemed to have seen this girl somewhere before. Wait a minute. That 9-tune silver snake was made by her? Yun Xiu also shouted loudly. Tu Lao nodded his head again and laughed loudly, very cheerfully. Everyone was somewhat at a loss. Why did it seem like these two grandmasters had previously seen Hellion Vivian's prowess? Only the figure of Murong Chongfeng, who was still in the arena, shook fiercely. He looked at Wei Wei with an unprecedented shock in his eyes. He didn't expect that the genius among geniuses that his master couldn't forget was actually her. I remember now. In the good courtyard, there was suddenly a student from the armament department who knocked his own head, with an appearance of sudden realization. At that time, Boss also participated in that armament competition at the Phoenix Pavilion. At that time she also just went in and came out. We thought that she didn't know anything and was driven out by Grandmaster Tu Lao. Looking at it now, it wasn't that Boss didn't know anything, it was clearly that her speed was too fast, that's why she could come out so quickly. No wonder until now we still haven't found the champion of that competition who left after receiving the silver. As it turns out, Boss never told anyone that the winner was her. If you cause a ruckus at this time, it'll be considered a violation of the Academy's rules. The dean will punish you. Yuan Lingxian was so angry that his face was distorted. He gasped for air in large mouthfuls, as if he was doing his best to suppress the anger in his chest. Hellion Vivian looked at his face and immediately felt that his deskmate's words weren't wrong. This kind of person letting him win a round was even more unacceptable than killing him. However, it was obviously already over. His deskmate still wanted to say the truth. This person really is sinister, too sinister. Hellion Vivian glanced sideways at Beligaju's perfect and flawless face, her gaze carrying a trace of inquiry. Beligaju naturally sensed her gaze. When he looked back, the corners of his mouth were already raised into a light smile that could merge with all things in the world, clean like an angel's. What's wrong? Nothing. Maybe she was thinking too much. Hellion Vivian faintly smiled. Let's receive the award. After receiving the award we'll go drink a big round. Beligaju responded with a good. His eyebrows were like ink as they quietly spread to his line of sight. The corners of his lips curved in a deep and unfathomable smile floated with faint traces of light and shadow. Drink? That's right. If you drink too much, you can seize the opportunity to do something, heh? The competition within the academy finally came to an end. This was the first time in the 100-year history that the inferior compound had won the championship. As for the superior compound, even if they were unwilling, they could only rank second. The matter of Hellion Jiaoer and Murong Chongfeng entering the battle spirit forces was thus dropped. There was no more room for discussion. Hellion Vivian took the award and walked off the stage. Her gaze indifferently swept over the young girl who wanted to escape. Miss Mu, it seems like there's something you forgot to do. That young girl's shoulders suddenly stiffened. She slowly turned her head and looked at everyone's gazes. She had no choice but to raise her arm. Flap. The sound of a slap was incomparably crisp. Hellion Jiaoer's gaze turned. She extended her hand and pitifully pulled on Hellion Vivian's long sleeve. Big sister, she only spoke out of turn. It's not a big crime. Why do you have to make it so difficult for her? It's not a big crime. Hellion Vivian laughed very, very hard. Then is it that right now when I insult your mother, Madame Sue, you also feel that it's not a big crime? Hellion Jiaoer choked until her fingers stopped. Hellion Vivian's expression was indifferent. Hellion Jiaoer, go back and tell that good mother of yours. All of this is only the beginning. That's right. The enmity of killing her mother, the pain of seizing her family. She still hadn't reported it. Now what was she doing? It was only the first step. Hellion Jiaoer tightly clenched her hands, but couldn't say a single word of rebuttal. Because some family matters were only known to themselves, it wasn't suitable to be spread out in the open. Hellion Vivian didn't care about her reaction. She unhurriedly straightened her sleeves. Looking at that young girl's slightly red cheeks, she smiled faintly. Miss Mu, remember I, Hellion Vivian, have always been one who doesn't offend people if they don't offend me. If they offend me, I'll cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Moreover, that year, if it wasn't for Taisher Mu's memorial, her mother wouldn't have died with blood in her mouth. Don't think that because she was young she didn't remember anything. On the contrary, the younger she was, the more she remembered how these people treated her and her mother. It was still that old saying, all of this was only the beginning. Next she would take back what was originally hers little by little. Other than a pitiful amount of living expenses, he didn't give her anything more. At that time Hellion Vivian understood what hatred was. She used all her time to study, trying to change all of this. She remembered very clearly that when she was in elementary school her classmates organized a summer camp. She was the only one left among the teachers. The conditions were not very good at a rural elementary school in the United States. Above her head an old electric fan rotated and hummed a melody. And what she wanted to thank was that at that moment, she met someone who could change her fate. The successor of the Tang sect, young Master Tang. Young Master Tang also suffered from depression. The kind of depression that could be seen through at a glance. He never spoke to others, but he was a top genius. Who would have thought that an 8-year-old child could actually use a computer to hack the system that the United States was most proud of? However, this child was a Chinese, a true Chinese. Hellion Vivian seemed to have found a group in an instant. She also wanted to become such a person because only by becoming stronger could she protect the people she wanted to protect. At a young age she made a decision. She followed young Master Tang to Chinatown and found old Master Tang. She fearlessly said that she wanted to join the Tang sect. Old Master Tang was still hesitating. After all, her identity was special. However, young Master Tang didn't even raise his head and said, "Okay." From then on she became one of the 18 shadows of the Tang sect. She was the ace of the aces and never failed. And the first thing she did when she became an adult was to buy all the shares of her father's company and go home to pick up her mother. Unfortunately, no one could wait for her for 8 years. Her mother was long gone, all because of her treacherous father and that venomous mistress. They were afraid of public condemnation, so they never let her mother out and even wanted to send her away. Therefore she hated her scumbag father and Mrs. Sue more than Hellion Vivian herself. The rain fell. Hellion Vivian also fell into a light sleep as she reminisced. Probably because she drank too much, the emotions that were originally well hidden surged out in an instant. Vaguely, Hellion Vivian felt something push aside the hair in front of her forehead. She frowned and turned her head to the other side. She heard a sigh beside her ear. Hellion Vivian wanted to open her eyes, but she was pulled deeper by the alcohol. Finally, someone helped her up. The smell of sandalwood mixed with the smell of mint had a hypnotic effect that made people want to fall. She tilted her head and fell into an unknown chest. When the person who made the toast saw this, he wanted to stand up and help Hellion Vivian over, but he didn't expect to be frozen in place by Beligaju's gaze. That gaze was extremely cold, as if he dared to touch Boss, this man would take his life. "I'll send her back." Beligaju's voice was calm and emotionless. But inexplicably they didn't dare to reject him. It had been like this ever since they made the toast just now. They clearly wanted to get this man drunk, but every time when the wine glass was about to be handed to him, they couldn't help but feel their hearts tremble. They abruptly turned a corner and sent it to Boss. This was too fucking strange. This man clearly looked very elegant and intellectual, and he had a faint smile on his face from beginning to end, without a trace of displeasure. But they just felt their scalps go numb. Don't ask them why. Chapter 175. Master, where are we going? Originally, according to His Highness's habit, he would take a bath at this time. But today, Shadow raised his head and looked at the person in Beligaju's arms. He couldn't help but be slightly stunned. That was a woman? Shadow almost doubted if he had seen wrongly. He rubbed his eyes hard. In the eyes of outsiders, His Highness had always been elegant and noble like a god. After all, he still had the halo of a saint above his head. But only Shadow knew how cold and unapproachable His Highness was when there was no one around. Especially when he disguised himself and entered White Academy. He seemed to be politely wandering in people's eyes, but in fact no one entered his world. Innate indifference, this was the real His Highness. One year when receiving foreign guests, the princess of the neighboring country also got drunk and insisted that His Highness personally send her off. That princess was indeed a bit rude and unreasonable. She didn't listen to anyone and even took the opportunity to wrap herself around His Highness's arm. The next day, His Highness set up a plan to let that princess marry into the most deserted courtyard. The reason was because His Highness couldn't stand that his favorite clothes were stained with the smell of alcohol by that princess. At that time, the retired emperor was so angry that he almost ordered people to hold His Highness down and give him a good beating. However, other than himself, who served His Highness all year round, only the retired emperor could see through his scheme. In short, the retired emperor was reluctant to punish His Highness, so he pulled His Highness to his side and taught him earnestly. His Highness listened from beginning to end and finally indifferently curved his lips. A woman who rubbed against my body, Imperial Grandfather wants me to be polite to her? I didn't kill her, that's good enough. However, His Highness unexpectedly took the initiative to hug a woman today. If this was in the past, Shadow would hardly dare to believe it. When Beligaju carried Hellion Vivian through the door, his fingers supported the side as if he was afraid of hurting her in his arms. Shadow was just about to step forward to help support Hellion Weiwei's body when Bailey Jiaju's cold eyes flashed past. Shadow retracted his hand as if he'd been cut, and respectfully retreated to the side. Beligaju retracted his gaze and said faintly, "You may leave." Shadow originally wanted to stay at the side and take care of Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never taken care of anyone before. But when he saw Beligaju's hand wrap around the back of Hellion Vivian's head and gently lift her up, Shadow silently retreated to the side. "Aju, why did you leave halfway through the wine?" Nangong Lai, with an incomparably evil smile, walked over from afar. Looking at the person in his embrace, the corner of his eyebrows raised. "Huh? This woman's face looks pretty good like this." As he spoke, Nangong Lai wanted to reach out and push aside Hellion Vivian's bangs to take a closer look. Unexpectedly, there was a loud bang. The wooden door in front of him suddenly closed. Before Nangong Lai could react, he choked on a mouthful of dust. "Fuck. Aju, my face is ruined." However, Nangong Lai was at a loss. Why wasn't he allowed to go in with them? It was obvious that Aju didn't have any ability to take care of people. Also, where's Shadow? Nangong Lai looked left and right. Just as he was about to leave, the wooden door in front of him opened again. In front of him was Beligaju's handsome and cold face. "Go get a basin of hot water, ? Nangong Lai's face was full of question marks. Nangong Jiaju thought for a moment and added, "And a towel." Chapter 176. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. "This is a secret that only I know. Elder He is actually He Zai's maternal grandfather. He Zai's parents had an accident outside the Great Wall, so he was brought back to be raised. Afterwards he followed Elder He's surname and became He. Aju, why are you suddenly asking this?" After he finished speaking, Nangong Lai felt his scalp go cold. Not because of anything else, but because even though the smile on Beligaju's lips didn't diminish, his eyes darkened as if he couldn't see the end of it. The next morning the sky was clear and boundless. Early in the morning each courtyard received the news to go to the hidden spirit temple, but this time was different. Every year the students accompanying were the winners and the second-place finishers, but this year the retired emperor personally selected candidates. There were people from each courtyard: Hellion Jiaoer, Murong Chongfeng from the superior courtyard, He Zai from the fine courtyard, and so on. Hellion Vivian was also on the list of candidates. Only she didn't really want to go, so her movements weren't that fast. After lazing around in bed for a while, She stood up and discovered that her clothes were different from yesterday. Who helped her change into her nightgown? Hellion Vivian knocked on her own head. Her first reaction was to check her own body, but there was no abnormality. Seems that she thought too much. However, in the future she couldn't drink so much wine anymore. This kind of unconscious feeling, experiencing it once was enough. This wasn't the modern world. Even though she had Yuan Ming to protect her, but under normal circumstances, Yuan Ming would also stay in the Xuanhuan space to cultivate. Unless Hellion Vivian really encountered some kind of attack, then he would sense the danger and come out. What was strange was that Yuan Ming, this guy was obviously a demon, but he was more punctual than her, a human. Every day he would sleep as soon as the sky turned dark and would wake up as soon as the sun rose. He also liked to eat noodles. He was simply a typical homebody, not at all in line with his fluttering silver hair. Hey Yuan Ming, nothing happened to me yesterday, right? In order to avoid remembering anything, Hellion Vivian said while rinsing her mouth. Yuan Ming lazily yawned. What could have happened to you yesterday? You slept like a dead pig and you even hugged me in the middle of the night. Woman, let me tell you the truth. Although you are quite interesting, I don't have any thoughts towards you. Thank you, but I don't have any thoughts about you. Hellion Vivian spat out the mouthwash in her mouth. Also, I'm hugging the ancient book, not you. Yuan Ming coldly snorted twice. He looked at himself in the mirror and asked, compared to your desk mate, this senior is actually not that much worse. What do you mean? Hellion Vivian grabbed the towel and frowned. Why is there a wet towel here? Yuan Ming raised his chin slightly. Appearance. Of course. Hellion Vivian casually placed the towel on the wooden rack and said, You're still far from it. Wake up, will you? Stop dreaming. My deskmate's appearance is not something you can achieve. What are you thinking about? Although Yuan Ming's appearance was also not bad, after seeing her deskmate's face so many times, she was immune to everything. That man was perfect from the beginning to the end. Hellion Vivian almost suspected that he had cheats on him. Hellion Wei Wei was washing her face while ridiculing him in her heart. She was absent-minded and somewhat slow. Yuan Ming paused for a bit. The words that he originally wanted to say were swallowed back into his stomach. Since you don't know how to make this senior happy, then this senior won't tell you that you were almost eaten by a certain someone, hee. Every time the young ladies from influential families went out, they had to make a lot of preparations, including what kind of clothes to wear, what kind of jewelry to wear, and what kind of hairstyle to match. Everything had to be tried several times. Even the rocking fan in their hands had to be several times more exquisite than the one made by others. What made these young ladies excited was that this time, not only was the retired emperor going to the hidden spirit temple, even the imperial family was called out. Dressed in military attire, he was like a deity at the front of the group. As the retired emperor's most beloved grandson, when his imperial grandfather went to burn incense, he naturally had to go along with it. But the reason for this was that the retired emperor still had other thoughts. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chosen so many young ladies to go out with him. Moreover, it was said that this time they were going out of the courtyard, and they had to stay at the hidden spirit temple for one night. All the basic necessities had to be taken care of there. Therefore, no matter if it was the young ladies or young masters, they all brought their own maids and attendants. On the contrary, Hellion Vivian was relaxed. She only brought a change of clothes and didn't bring anything else that was useless. In fact, from her point of view, those young ladies from influential families were doing some useless work. Since the third prince was leading the group, he would naturally be at the front and wouldn't have time to see what clothes they were wearing. However, speaking of which, since the last time they signed that contract, she and the third prince hadn't met. Since they met this time, they could talk about the matter of armament components. Because the journey to the hidden spirit temple wasn't close, the retired emperor had prepared carriages for the students early on. If the men were willing to ride a horse, they could ride a horse. If they weren't, they could ride a carriage. The servants served them attentively. The carriage was covered with plush cushions, making it very comfortable to sit on. But since ancient times, men were hot-blooded. Most of those men didn't ride a carriage. Instead, people rode on war horses. Looking at them in a row, each one was extraordinarily handsome. It made those young ladies from influential families who slowly walked over with their maids blush. Hellion Vivian originally wanted to ask her desk mate what happened yesterday, but when she looked around, she didn't see the shadow of her desk mate. Her long eyebrows couldn't help but wrinkle. She was the only one from the inferior compound who was selected? Elder sister Jiao Er look at her looking around. She's really too petty. Standing next to Helian Jiaoer was the daughter of the Liang family, who had recently become quite powerful in the capital. She was also a member of the fine compound. Because she had been in secluded cultivation, she didn't participate in this time's exam. Some people said that if she had participated, the current situation wouldn't be like this. However, the competition was already over. No matter what they said, it was futile. Helian Jiaoer patted her hand and walked in small steps towards Helian Vivian's direction. Wearing a light-colored 7 layers of brocade silk gauze, her eyes hid a poisonous intent that only Helian Vivian could see. Elder sister, don't be so sloppy in a moment. If by any chance you do something and make the retired emperor angry, that would be disastrous. Helian Vivian lazily lifted her eyelids, neither cold nor indifferent. It was as if she didn't put these two people in her eyes. Helian Jiaoer coldly snorted. Her long skirt swayed, bringing out a terrifying arc. Even if she was more powerful in martial arts, so what? If she didn't know how to get along with people and didn't know how to scheme in a fight, this little slut would still die. Helian Jiaoer lifted her eyes. Her peripheral vision slowly slid past a carriage not far away. Her body brushed past a young lady from the good compound who was born of a concubine. The smile on the corner of her mouth became increasingly intense. It seemed that mother had already arranged everything. This time she was going to Hidden Spirit Temple. She wanted to make sure that Helian Vivian would never be able to make a comeback. Chapter 177. Set out. Eunuch Sun held the horsetail whisk in his hand and stood at the very front of the Imperial Guards. He straightened his back and shouted with a sharp voice. Every student was very happy. After all, there weren't many opportunities to leave the academy. Not to mention the full schedule of classes, it was very difficult to ask for leave from the teacher. Men and women traveling together like today was even more unthinkable. Therefore, no matter if it was a young lady from a famous family or a young master from an influential family, they were all looking forward to this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. Helian Jiaoer and Liang family's young lady looked at each other and smiled. Supported by a maid, they entered the carriage. When Helian Vivian turned around, she paused. It wasn't because of anything else, but because the carriage she was going to ride in had one of its wheels broken. If this kind of wheel went on a mountain road, it would certainly be unstable. In addition, at night the mountain road was rugged and foggy. It was very easy for accidents to happen. According to reason, these carriages were all prepared by the retired emperor, so this kind of situation shouldn't happen. But unfortunately, the carriage she was going to ride in had a broken beam. As smart as Helian Vivian was, she didn't believe that there would be such a coincidence. This situation seemed to be deliberately arranged by someone. After all, if a problem really happened, even if the Yamen investigated, it would at most be considered an accident. It seemed that the other party really wanted her to die immediately. Helian Vivian stood up straight and narrowed her eyes. Just as she was about to send someone to ask if there were any other carriages. The little eunuch standing to the side threw the horsetail whisk in his hand and seemed to be anxious. Hurry up, hurry up. If we delay the retired emperor's time to burn incense, it will be a big crime. Helian Vivian glanced at him, her eyes cold. The little eunuch unexpectedly felt that he was seen through. He was frightened and stepped back. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. If someone sits in this kind of carriage and something happens, who will bear the responsibility? Miss Helian, you really are joking. With the Imperial Guards, how could something happen? The little eunuch's eyes turned around and he said with a laugh, Miss Helian should quickly get on the carriage. Helian Vivian hooked his thin lips. You want me to get in the car, but there is one thing, you go up with me. The little eunuch's face paled as he took a step back. Originally, he was the one who had tampered with the carriage. He had seen and done this kind of thing many times in the imperial palace. Those concubines and concubines, you set me up, I set you up, there were too many to count. When he first collected the money, he felt that this method was very vicious. When the carriage was on the mountain road, as long as it encountered the night fog, the wheels would slip and it would rush to the bottom of the cliff. He could get rid of the other party without anyone knowing. At that time the carriage would be smashed to pieces. No matter how angry the retired emperor was, even if he sent many people to investigate, he would not be able to find any clues. That was why the little eunuch dared to accept that person's money. What's more, the eldest daughter of the Hellion family standing in front of him didn't have any power or influence. She was also driven out of her home by the Hellion family. Even if she wore the Hellion family's surname when all was said and done, she was still nothing more than a commoner. In the imperial palace, almost every day, a palace maid would jump into the river. The death of a commoner wouldn't cause much of a commotion. No, not investigate her, but investigate him. The little eunuch's back shook, his eyes widened. An unprecedented cold feeling engulfed his entire body. This woman, she already knew that he was the one who tampered with the wheels. Eunuch Sundate Hellion Vivian blew on her fingers and lightly smiled. The Hellion family gave a lot of money, right? The little eunuch's lips trembled as if he was struck by something. His fingers also trembled. What is Miss Hellion talking about? This servant doesn't understand at all. Is that so? Hellion Vivian closed her eyes and rested. Then just wait for Eunuch Sun to come and ask. If he asks, you'll definitely understand. In a split second, the little eunuch's smile froze. He raised his head and looked at the smile on Hellion Vivian's face. It was as if he saw a demon that just walked out from hell. He no longer dared to treat her as a 14 or 15-year-old girl who didn't understand anything. He even somewhat regretted accepting this money. He absolutely couldn't wait until Eunuch Sun came to investigate. If Eunuch Sun came to investigate, that madam behind would inevitably be drawn out. Chapter 178. Miss Hellion, why don't you ride a horse? The little eunuch forced a smile. This servant has also prepared a horse here. Hellion Vivian smiled. You want me, an unmarried young lady, to ride a horse in public? This isn't too convenient. The little eunuch was speechless. She was using his words just now to block him. Furthermore, when had she ever cared about whether she was married or not? She clearly didn't want to leave. The little eunuch felt an unprecedented thorny problem. The little eunuch with the broken tail in front glanced at him, meaning for him to quickly follow. Unfortunately, Hellion Vivian didn't even move. The little eunuch thought that this time he was really finished. If this matter was leaked, there was no need for Eunuch Sun to investigate, that madam would personally make a move. After all, only the dead could keep a secret. What to do? What should he do? Just as the little eunuch was at the end of his rope, a carriage suddenly stopped beside him. What's the matter? Did something happen to little sister Weiwei's carriage? It was like this in the upper-class circle. Obviously, two people had only met face-to-face a few times, but they could call each other sisters. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and looked at the person who spoke. That was a young lady from an aristocratic family from the good compound. She looked like a pretty girl from a humble family. Her father had just been promoted to the capital, and now it could be considered smooth sailing. But seriously speaking, among this group of accompanying students, her status wasn't high. She also didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi talent, and also didn't participate in this time's test. Following to the hidden spirit temple like this was somewhat unexpected. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed and she smiled faintly. There really is a problem. The carriage's wheels are somewhat old and we're currently waiting for Eunuch Sun to come and solve it. The wheels are old. That girl frowned and glanced at Hellion Vivian. She seemed to want to say something but hesitated, then she continued. If little sister Weiwei doesn't mind, then sit in the same carriage with me. On this way up, us sisters can still talk to relieve our boredom. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and was just about to refuse. The woman deliberately glanced at the wheel and said vaguely, coincidentally, I also have some things to remind my sister to be careful about. Hellion Vivian smirked. Then I'll have to trouble Sister Shen. What are you talking about? I'm just happy that you don't dislike me. As she spoke, Qin Wenwan glanced at the servant girls standing outside the carriage. Why aren't you helping little sister Weiwei up yet? The servant girl was about to step forward. Hellion Vivian took a big step forward. No need, I'll do it myself. Younger sister has such charming skills. Qin Wenwan laughed lightly, waving the paper fan in her hand. Every movement was like a painting. Hellion Vivian sat next to her and smiled. She didn't say anything else. Qin Wenwan looked outside the carriage, her gaze intentionally or unintentionally falling on that young eunuch. Only after glancing in that direction did she lower the curtain, her voice low. Let's go, don't miss the hour. Yes. With a light wave of the horsewhip, the wheels left a trail of tracks in the muddy rain-soaked ground. The young eunuch stood in the shadows, unable to see his expression. He could only faintly feel that he let out a sigh of relief. With the Imperial Guard leading the way, the carriages behind were much steadier than usual. In addition, these carriages were all personally prepared by the retired emperor. Sitting in them was very comfortable. There was even a small square table in the carriage. On the square table there was a small teapot and a pile of dried fruits. The more she looked, the more it seemed like an outdoor outing. Hellion Vivian poured herself a cup of tea. The best thing about taking a mountain road was that it wasn't too hot. With the gentle breeze, one could see beauty everywhere. Hellion Vivian had just taken a sip of tea when Chen Wenwan, who was sitting next to her, looked left and right. She took a deep breath, as if she was making an important decision. She leaned over and whispered in her ear. "That carriage of yours was set up by little sister Jiao Air and the others." Hellion Vivian's fingers that were playing with the porcelain cup paused. Her eyebrows jumped. "How did sister know?" "I came early today and saw it with my own eyes." Chen Wenwan finished speaking and let out a long sigh. "Looks like little sister Jiao Air won't tolerate you." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Since it's like this, why didn't sister tell Eunuch Sun but instead told me?" "Little sister, do you really not understand, or are you pretending not to understand?" Chen Wenwan picked up a piece of pastry. "Little sister Jiao Air is someone who cannot be provoked at White Academy. She also has the protection of the 4 great clans. No matter what the royal family's attitude is, the retired emperor also hopes that the one to become the 3rd princess consort will be little sister Jiao Air. Eunuch Sun is someone who follows the royal family. How could he cause trouble for his future master? Even if I said it, what benefit would I get? When the time comes, maybe I'll even be pushed out of the academy." Hellion Vivian smiled again. "Listening to sister's meaning, it seems like you've suffered a loss in this aspect. Little sister really is smart." Chen Wenwan smiled again with a deeper meaning. At this point, even if there is no enmity or resentment, as long as one's appearance is not bad, and has the opportunity to get close to His Highness, they will all be pushed aside. It's just that we're all small fries. Actually, little sister, being targeted like this, haven't you thought of any countermeasures? What countermeasures? Hellion Vivian followed along with the other's words, smiling yet not smiling. Chen Wenwan looked around and made sure that the car windows were all closed. Only then did she mysteriously whisper, "I actually have a method here." "What method?" Hellion Vivian cooperated and also lowered her body. Chen Wenwan hesitated for a moment, pausing between each word. "This time, going to the hidden spirit temple to offer incense is actually because of the flood in the south. The retired emperor wants to go pray for blessings. If there is someone who does something wrong, they will certainly receive a heavier punishment than usual. Little sister, it would be better for you to take advantage of this opportunity and fight for yourself." "Fight for myself?" Hellion Vivian didn't seem to understand. The light in Chen Wenwan's eyes faintly deepened. Chapter 179. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. "Then when should I put this witchwood in?" "Little sister doesn't need to worry about this." Chen Wenwan's eyes quickly flashed with a trace of light. "When we arrive at the hidden spirit temple, there will be people who will arrange for the students to rest. The young ladies will always have a convenient time. Before the night tour, little sister only needs to take advantage of the time when the retired emperor is burning incense and place this thing on that person's body." Hellion Vivian slightly wrinkled her brows. "What if it's discovered?" "Little sister, you don't need to worry. With me as a cover, no one will see." Chen Wenwan said with a sense of loyalty, her tone even carrying a hint of incitement. Hellion Vivian thoughtfully smiled. "Okay, then let's try according to elder sister's method. Since someone had dug a hole for her to jump into, if she didn't go and explore, wouldn't that be too much of a pity? However, when the time came, the one caught in the middle would probably be someone else." The carriage traveled for about 8 hours before it was time to rest. Everyone sat in their own seats. The young masters of the aristocratic families sat across from each other, drinking water and chatting. Their elegant demeanor made the young ladies in dresses laugh one after another. In contrast to the men's side that was joyous and harmonious, the women's side was clearly divided into factions. No one was willing to sit together with Hellion Vivian. Even though she had won first place in the armament competition in front of everyone, In the hearts of the girls, she who had no power, no influence and even no looks, simply wouldn't accompany them to drink tea together. The servant girls served them meticulously, taking out the prepared osmanthus and lotus seed soup and pouring it bit by bit into the bowls. This was iced in advance and was most suitable for drinking when going out. Helian Jiaoer took the bowls and instructed the servant girl, "Let the other two older sisters have a taste too. Although it's not anything good, it'll quench their thirst." This icy cold feeling really isn't bad. The young miss of the Liang family carefully drank a mouthful, using a handkerchief to cover the corners of her mouth. After seeing Helian Vivian sitting across from her and eating steamed buns, she disdainfully curled her lips. Some people really are lacking in status. What kind of place is this, eating steamed buns and spiced beef? But what's up with that Chen guy? Why is he hanging out with that country bumpkin? Helian Jiaoer also glanced at Helian Vivian and smiled. The young masters on the other side also noticed the commotion. While drinking the Longjing tea served by the waiter, he glanced in the direction of Helian Vivian from time to time. The disdain on his face was very obvious. If not, this ugly person can't enter the hall of elegance. No matter how powerful she is, she's still a barbaric woman. A few of them laughed and some even joked, "With her looks, even if you send her to me, I'll have to think about it." The young masters spoke in a very low voice and the bystanders could not hear them at all. If Helian Vivian really heard this, the person who said this probably wouldn't live to see the next weekend. Moreover, they had never thought that one day the person whom they disdained to even touch would actually have such a stunning appearance to contend for the throne of the capital. However, this was all a story for later. As of now, Helian Vivian still had that slightly dark face, and she was absent-mindedly nibbling on the steamed bun in her hand. Actually, her table manners were very good, with a kind of British elegance. With a smile that wasn't a smile, she would use wooden chopsticks to pick up a piece of beef and place it in her mouth. Her lunchbox was also very good-looking. It was made of pure wood and its insulation was very good. On one side there were fruits and vegetables. It looked very appetizing. She didn't know if it was because it was too appetizing. Unexpectedly, a voice came from the side of her ear. "Hey woman, what are you eating? I want to exchange with you." Sitting beside Helian Vivian, Chen Wenwan's hand that was drinking tea paused. As the shadow of the tree swayed, she finally clearly saw the appearance of the man who spoke. Her beautiful eyes widened and her pink lips were tightly pursed. She didn't know when, but the hand that was holding the handkerchief had been tightly clenched. Her fingernails penetrated the handkerchief and left red marks on her palm. Her heart was beating wildly. "Miss." Her personal maid tugged at her sleeve, as if reminding her to pay attention to the situation. Only then did Chen Wenwan wake up with a start. Taking a deep breath, she nonchalantly used her sleeve to cover her palm. When she raised her eyes again, they were already incomparably gentle. "Young Master He," Zhe grunted. Carrying an unconcealable tyrannical aura, he strode past her and lowered his eyes to look at Helian Vivian. "Woman, you didn't hear what I said, did you? What are you going to exchange with me?" Helian Vivian unhurriedly put down the wooden chopsticks in her hand. She didn't have any intention of responding to young Master He. Last time he even used her to test his childhood sweetheart and whatnot. It was simply enough. Zhe greedily glanced at the marinated beef in her lunchbox. "That little servant of mine made bird's nest for me. Right now it's still chilled. I'll give it all to you." "Bird's nest?" Helian Vivian uninterestedly shrugged her shoulders. "Swallows saliva, you can keep it for yourself and slowly eat it." Zhe glared. Originally he spoke up to help Helian Vivian get out of this predicament. Why did this silly woman always bring something that couldn't be brought out in public when she went out? But after seeing her lunchbox he started drooling. After entering the temple there wouldn't be any meat to eat. Right now he just wanted to eat a mouthful of marinated beef to satisfy his craving. "Then what will it take for you to give me your lunchbox? I've already eaten half of it. You still want it?" Helian Vivian swept a glance over Zhe's eyes. She knew that the other party had taken a fancy to the meat in her lunchbox. Knowing that this partner of hers was a master that couldn't be happier without meat, she followed suit and laughed. "If you really want me to give it to you, then I can. 1,000 taels of silver." Zhe didn't say anything, but the little servant beside him jumped up. 1,000 taels of silver, you might as well go rob someone. Really, in the time that he wasn't with the young master, Just what kind of people did the young master befriend? Why did he look at this Hellion Vivian in a new light? You think it's expensive? Hellion Vivian was only joking. After seeing the disdain in the little servant's eyes, her smile became even wider, but the depths of her eyes were ice cold. Young Master He doesn't have to buy it. As soon as He saw her like this, he knew that she was angry. Originally, the two of them often joked, especially this kind of joke about money. How come when someone else got involved the flavor changed? This young master still hasn't spoken. Why are you interrupting? He indifferently said. Go prepare 1,000 taels of silver for Miss Hellion. He did this not only to tell the little servant that Hellion Vivian was different, but also to let those young masters know that some jokes shouldn't be made carelessly. After all, Heise's identity was there. Seeing that he also ate the marinated beef, the other people also couldn't say anything. They could only embarrassedly move their gazes away and stop talking. Hellion Vivian naturally understood Heise's intentions. She lightly laughed and said, No need, how could I use 1,000 taels of silver? If you like it, then take it to eat. I also brought wine here, how about it? Chapter 180. There's even wine. Heise's eyes thoroughly lit up this time. Quickly take it out and drink a few mouthfuls. Hellion Vivian made a sound of agreement and spread out the things she brought. Apart from the sauced beef, there were also small ribs neatly arranged. It looked like there were meat and vegetables and it was still steaming. She then poured 2 cups of wine and really enjoyed it very much. The young masters naturally also smelled that fragrance, but since they previously mocked Hellion Vivian, it wasn't good for them to come here and ask for wine and meat. They could only swallow their saliva and smile, but in their hearts, they were very envious of Heise. Under this kind of environment he could still eat a mouthful of food. One must know that after entering the temple, it was a vegetarian feast. Not to mention that not a drop of wine was touched, they also weren't allowed to eat meat. The young masters tasted tea and snacks and quietly gossiped. Unconsciously their voices became louder and louder. On the other side of them was Bailey Jia's carriage. Eunuch's son was worried that these discussions would disturb His Highness' rest, so he took a horsetail whisk and smiled towards this side. Young masters, His Highness still has to lead the team in the afternoon and needs to rest. Everyone please be quiet. Yes, Eunuch's son's reminder is correct. We saw that Heise, that guy, had a good relationship with that Hellion family's eldest young lady at some unknown time. We felt astonished in our hearts and couldn't help but say a few more words. Is that so? What kind of good relationship? An indifferent and deep voice came from the direction of the carriage. A few young masters raised their heads to look and saw Baligaju leaning against the window with his chin propped up. His face wore a silver mask and the corners of his lips lightly sunk. Under the alternating shadows of the sunlight and branches, it formed a quiet beauty, but there wasn't a trace of a smile in the depths of his eyes. I'm really sorry to wake you up. It's fine. His Highness just happened to feel bored and wanted to hear what you were talking about. Baligaju unhurriedly put down the teacup in his hand. His voice was indifferent, but it carried a kind of indescribable oppressive feeling. No, I just feel that it's really rare for Heise to be like this today. That Hellion Vivian brought a lot of things and is sitting over there with Heise to eat. In front of Bailey Jiaju, the few young masters naturally wouldn't be as unbridled as before. They were afraid that Third Prince would mistakenly believe that they were debauches who specialized in gossiping about other people behind their backs. They hurriedly pointed in a direction not too far away. Your Highness can see for yourself. Those two people seem to have a very good relationship. Bailey Jiaju followed that person's finger and looked over. It just so happened to be the scene of Hellion Wei pouring wine for Heise with the side of her face. Heise conveniently pinched a piece of pork rib from her lunchbox and put it into his mouth. Bailey Jiaju's dark pupils dilated in that split second, but he quickly calmed down. That handsome face was still as indifferent as before, with an indifferent appearance. It seemed that he was not very interested in what he was paying attention to. In contrast, those young masters always felt that they were too gossipy and laughed awkwardly. Heise has always been unpredictable. It's probably because old Master Hei's side urged him too much, and he's also had some thoughts. Speaking of which, he used to be pretty good to that childhood sister of his, but recently he's been rejecting that girl, but he's become closer to Hellion Wei. Could it be that he's serious this time? After saying that, they felt that saying this seemed to be even more gossipy. Being too close to her will indeed affect her reputation. It's my thinking that was too simple. Even if I want to be close, I still have to wait for grandfather's approval. Zhe deliberately added the last sentence. He didn't believe that the third prince would inexplicably warn him for a woman. Beligaju curved his thin lips and took a step forward. His deep eyes were like ice fog rising in the night sky. As he brushed past him, he only left behind an ice-cold warning. You can see if Lord Hayes nod first, or if that childhood sweetheart of yours will be betrothed first. In an instant, Zhe's left hand clenched tightly. The smile on his face faded in the next second. After a moment, he smiled again and pressed his fingers against his forehead. He thought that the matter of that woman provoking the third prince was already over. He didn't expect that it still wasn't over. But for him to believe that the third prince liked that woman, that wasn't very likely. Could it be that the rumors were true? That the third prince was choosing a consort now to use someone as a shield, in order to protect the woman he truly cared about?